Hold my hand. I'll help you cross. Annie spoke. She gave him a gentle smile and held out her hand to the man. The man leaned heavily on his cane. He looked at the young girl standing in front of him with both surprise and suspicion. His eyes moved from Annie's face to her open hand, then back to her eyes, as if he were trying to find something hidden behind her kindness. He shook his head slightly. I don't need anyone's pity. Annie did not lower her hand. The cold wind swept across the intersection, strong enough to make people tuck their chins into their collars and walk faster. Traffic crowded the lanes. A city bus stopped near the curb, releasing a cloud of white steam into the cold air. Pedestrians slipped around them. Some frowned, some looked, then quickly turned away, as if stopping for even a moment might ruin their entire day. I'm not pitying you, sir, Annie said, her voice still soft. I just want to help you cross the street. The man let out a heavy breath. It carried more pain than irritation. Keep walking, he said. You don't even know who I am. Annie's expression did not change. I don't need to know who you are, she replied. I can see that your leg hurts, and I want to help you cross the street. I am crossing, he said, though they both knew he was not able to move. Or I will in a minute. I don't need anyone's help. Annie glanced toward the pedestrian signal. The white walking figure was still lit, but time was running out quickly. She looked back at him, keeping her voice calm. But the light only gives us a few seconds. I've seen you standing here for a while. Let me help you get across before the cars start moving again. I told you to leave me alone. He pushed his cane forward and tried to lift his right leg, but the moment his weight shifted onto that side, pain struck so sharply that his face went rigid. His shoulders tightened. A faint groan escaped his throat before he could swallow it back. Oh, God. Annie immediately stepped closer, still careful not to startle him. She placed one hand near his forearm and held the other near his wrist, steady but not forceful. You're in a lot of pain, she said. With your leg like this, you shouldn't try to walk alone. Let me help you just for this short stretch. Hold my hand, and I'll get you across safely. I mean it. She nodded gently toward the crosswalk. Come on, sir. If we start now, we can still make it. But before he could answer, the signal changed. The white walking figure disappeared. The red hand lit up across the street. Cars began to roll forward, filling the intersection with the sound of tires brushing against the wet pavement. Annie let out a quiet breath and stepped back from the curb, but she stayed close enough to catch him if his knee gave out again. All right, she said. We'll wait for the next light. I told you that you don't need to wait with me. I heard you, sir, and yet you're still here. Yes, sir. A woman in a beige coat walked past them. She slowed down and looked at the man with clear irritation. You've been standing here all this time and still haven't crossed. This girl wants to help you. Just let her help. The man snapped his head toward her. The pain had drained his patience, and the woman's tone pushed what was left of it over the edge. That is none of your business, he snapped. The woman paused for half a second, her expression growing even more annoyed. Well, excuse me for having eyes. Then she walked away, muttering loudly enough for both of them to hear. Some people get kindness and still don't know how to take it. No wonder he's standing there freezing. The man's jaw tightened. Annie saw his hand grip the cane harder. Now he was not only in pain, he was humiliated. And sometimes humiliation made people sharper than pain ever could. Annie lowered her voice. Don't worry about her. I'm not worried about her. You're gripping that cane like it owes you money. He looked down at his hand and saw that his fingers had turned pale from squeezing too tightly. After a moment, he loosened his grip a little. Annie stayed beside him while traffic continued to flow through the intersection. People moved quickly around them. A man in a navy coat passed without slowing down. Two office workers stepped around his cane as if it were nothing more than an obstacle on the sidewalk. A driver near the curb leaned forward to watch the signal, eager to move before the cold could creep deeper into his car. The man stared at the crosswalk, his eyes heavy, as if that short stretch of road had somehow grown several miles longer while he waited. Annie looked at the pedestrian signal. When the light changes again, I'll help you across. The man looked at her, tired almost to the point of irritation. Why are you so determined to get me across the street? If you weren't standing here talking to me, you would probably be home by now. Annie gave a small shrug. Maybe, but your leg hurts. I just want to help you cross the street, and then I'll go home. He studied her for a while, as if trying to decide whether she was stubborn, foolish, or something rarer than both. How do you know my leg hurts that badly? He asked. Are you a doctor? No, sir, Annie replied. I'm an intern at the hospital. An intern? Yes, sir. So not a doctor. Not yet. Annie lowered her eyes slightly. Maybe I never will be. But I know what pain looks like when someone is trying to hide it. The man turned his face away. But this time he did not argue. Annie kept her voice calm. Every time you try to step, your knee stiffens. Your right foot barely touches the ground. And every time you put weight on that side, you hold your breath. You notice a lot. At the hospital, noticing things is part of the work. You look far too young to be making medical observations on a sidewalk. I hear that a lot, Annie said. But your knee doesn't care how young I look. He let out a very quiet breath, almost like a laugh. But the pain swallowed most of the sound. Traffic began to slow. The pedestrian light turned on again. The crowd beside them immediately started moving. Annie held out her hand once more. Ready? No, I know. She smiled gently. But we're still going. He hesitated for a moment, then finally placed his hand in hers. His fingers were ice cold, stiff from gripping the cane for too long. Annie closed her hand around his, not tightly, just enough to keep him steady. With her other hand, she supported his forearm so the joint would not twist when he stepped. Just across the street, he said, as if reminding himself more than speaking to her. Just across the street, Annie promised. They began to move. His cane touched the pavement first, making a dry tap against the wet road. Annie matched his rhythm, slow and steady. Cane first, Annie said. Good. Now the left foot, then let the right foot follow. Don't rush. A horn sounded ahead of them. The man flinched. Annie immediately raised her other hand toward the traffic. Wait a moment. We're moving. The driver behind the windshield threw up both hands in irritation. Another driver near the curb shook his head and looked away. The crowd spread around them with visible annoyance, as if a person in pain were no different from a sack blocking the walkway. Annie stood slightly toward the traffic lane, using her own body as a shield for him. You shouldn't stand on that side, the man said through clenched teeth. I'm not standing, Annie replied. I'm walking with you. They had reached the middle of the street. The white stripes beneath their feet were wet from melted snow and road salt. Annie did not look at the traffic for too long. She watched his steps. His right knee trembled with every movement. The muscles around the joint had tightened from the cold, and every step brought a sharp stab of pain that he tried to hide. Breathe in, Annie said. Now breathe out. Don't hold your breath. I know how to breathe. Then prove it, sir. He obeyed, though his expression remained irritated. We're almost there, Annie said. Just a little farther. My leg disagrees. Right now, your leg doesn't get to decide. For the first time, he looked at her with something close to trust. They had just reached the curb when the traffic light changed. Cars behind them began rolling forward, close and fast, dirty water splashing beneath the tires. Annie kept holding his hand for a few more seconds, waiting until he was truly steady before slowly letting go. Annie pointed across the sidewalk toward a small park beside the hospital. Behind a low iron fence, bare trees stood still in the cold wind. A few benches lined the path, damp with a thin layer of melted snow and evening mist. There's a park over there, Annie said. I'll help you to a bench. You need to sit down. I do not need to sit down. Sir, your knee is shaking. It does that. Then it can do that while you're sitting. The man gave her a sharp look, but Annie only raised her eyebrows slightly, calm as if she had no intention of arguing, only winning through patience. I have somewhere to be, he said. So do I, Annie replied. But that bench is closer than both of our plans. He glanced toward the park, then back at the traffic light, then at her hand still supporting his arm. You really don't give up, do you? Not when someone might fall. I'm not going to fall. Good. Then prove it by slowing down. His mouth moved as if he was about to argue, but instead he let out a long breath. Fine. That bench. Then you go home. That sounds reasonable. That was not an offer. I heard you. Annie adjusted the way she supported his arm so he could keep a little of his pride. She did not pull him. She did not hold him as if he were helpless. She simply walked beside him, close enough for him to lean on her if he needed to, gentle enough to let him feel as if he was still walking on his own. The park was only a short distance away. But with his knee in that condition, the walk felt much longer. His cane touched the ground first, then his left foot, then his right foot dragged forward with a small pause of pain. Annie counted each step silently in her head. She watched the cracks in the sidewalk, the wet leaves near the curb, and the old streaks of salt that could make the tip of his cane slip. They reached the park gate. Annie pushed the iron gate open gently with her shoulder, then helped him inside. The noise from the street softened a little. The air still smelled of exhaust and cold, but it felt wider here, quieter. A few pigeons hopped near a trash can. An older man in a knit hat sat at the end of the path, feeding the birds crumbs from a paper bag. No one paid much attention to Annie and the man with the cane. "There," Annie said, nodding toward the nearest bench. "Just a few more steps." She helped him turn and sit down. He lowered himself slowly, one hand still gripping the cane, the other hovering near his knee, as if he feared the pain would strike again the moment he let his guard down. As soon as he sat, his shoulders dropped. Not much, but enough for Annie to see how hard he had been holding himself together. "If you can, keep your foot straight," she said. "Don't bend the knee too much." He followed her instruction before he remembered that he was supposed to be irritated with her. Annie bent slightly in front of him, careful to keep enough distance so he would not feel crowded. "Is the pain sharp, burning, or more like pressure inside the joint?" He looked down at her. "You ask that as if you actually expect an answer." "I do." He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Sharp when I step, heavy when I stand still, burning whenever the wind hits it." "Did it start suddenly?" "About 20 minutes ago. Maybe 30. Did you injure it or bump into anything?" "No." "Any history of arthritis?" His eyes narrowed. "You really did come from the hospital." "I told you I did. People say many things. So do you." He turned his face away, but some of the tension in his expression eased. "Yes," he finally said. "Arthritis. It flares up from time to time, usually not this badly. Cold weather can make the muscles around the joint tighten," Annie said. "When the muscles tighten, they pull on the joint. Then every step hurts more than the one before." He looked at her. This time, it was not quite suspicion. It was closer to curiosity. "What did you say your name was?" "Annie Carter." "Annie Carter," he repeated, slower this time. "Yes, sir. I'm Richard." "It's nice to meet you, Richard." As she said it, Annie noticed the expensive watch partly hidden under his sleeve, the polished handle of his cane, and the carefully tailored coat that did not need bright colors to look costly. He was not dressed to show off, but there were small signs. Signs of money, or at least of a man used to finer things. Annie did not ask anything more. To her, pain did not care whether a person was rich or poor. Her back still ached from the long shift. Her feet throbbed inside her old worn shoes. She thought of the small room waiting for her at home, the walk still ahead of her, and the message from her mother that she had not answered yet. But then Richard shifted slightly, and his knee trembled again. Every other thought in Annie's mind fell away. She reached into the pocket of her coat and took out a small, sealed pain relief patch. Richard noticed it at once. "What is that?" "A pain relief patch. It may help ease the pain a little until you can get proper medical care. You carry those with you?" Annie looked a little embarrassed, but she still gave a faint smile. "Some days my back needs help too." "Then use it on your back. I can get another one." "You do not know that, but I know you need this one more right now." His face tightened again, but this time it had less to do with his knee. "I told you I don't need pity. And I told you, this isn't pity." "Then what is it?" Annie tore open the package and warmed the patch between her palms. "Help," she said. "People just have a hard time saying that word because no one likes admitting they need it." Richard had no quick answer to that. Annie looked up at him. "May I?" He hesitated for a moment, then gave a short nod. Annie bent down and placed the patch near the side of his knee, careful not to press too hard. Her hands were gentle but steady, not rushed and not pitying. She simply moved like someone caring for another person. Richard watched her hands. "You just finished your shift at the hospital?" "Yes, sir." "Long shift?" "Long enough." "And you still stopped?" "You were in pain. Plenty of people walked past me." Annie smoothed the edge of the patch and gently pulled her hand away. "That does not mean I had to become one of them." If Annie's kindness touched your heart, please like this video. Comment where you are watching from because someone near you may be watching this story too. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring stories. Richard turned his head toward the street outside the park. The traffic light changed again. People crossed as usual. hurried, and hunched against the cold, each one heading towards somewhere they needed to be. The city kept moving as if nothing had happened. "Most people don't stop," he said. Annie stood and tucked the empty wrapper into her coat pocket. Maybe they should practice. The phone inside Richard's coat began to ring. He ignored it. It rang again. Annie glanced toward the sound. "Someone is trying to reach you." Richard took out the phone and looked at the screen. A very small change crossed his face, but Annie still noticed it. "Yes," he said quietly. "They usually are." He answered the call. "It's me. I'm in the park across from Street Catherine. I'm fine." The voice on the other end came fast and worried, but Annie could not make out the words. Richard's voice turned cold. "No, don't make a scene. I said I'm fine." He ended the call. Annie looked at him. "Someone is worried about you?" "Yes," he said. For a few seconds, both of them were silent. The wind moved through the bare trees. Annie stood beside the bench in her thin coat, while Richard sat there with the pain relief patch beginning to warm beside his knee. They were still strangers, but somehow not as much as before. Then the sound of tires braking sharply came from near the park entrance. Annie turned around. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb almost at the same time. The doors opened. Men in black suits stepped out with urgent expressions. The man in front quickly passed through the park gate and headed straight toward the bench. He stopped in front of Richard, bowed deeply, and spoke in a voice full of trembling relief. "Chairman Hale, thank God we found you." Annie's hand tightened around the empty patch wrapper in her coat pocket. "Chairman Hale?" She looked from the men in suits to Richard. Richard did not seem surprised. He only looked at Annie with calm, tired eyes, as if he already knew what she was thinking. The man she had just helped across the street was not simply Richard. He was Richard Hale. Annie did not move at first. The words seemed to hang in the cold air between the bench and the men in dark suits. Chairman Hale, the man who had argued with her at the crosswalk, the man who had refused her hand twice, the man who had sat on a park bench while she pressed a pain patch near his knee, was being addressed as if the whole city had been searching for him. The first man in the suit stayed bent for another second, then straightened. He was tall, with a close-trimmed beard and an earpiece tucked against one ear. His coat was open despite the cold, and his face carried the tense relief of someone who had imagined every possible disaster and found the least terrible one. "Sir, we have been calling for nearly 20 minutes, he said. "Miss Hale is on her way. Security at the hospital said you left through the east exit without your driver." Richard sighed. "Marcus, lower your voice." Marcus glanced at Annie, then at the pain patch on Richard's knee, then at Annie again. His manner changed at once, not rude, but guarded. "Who is she?" Annie felt that question land on her skin. Not what happened. Not "Are you hurt?" "Who is she?" Richard's eyes sharpened. "She is the reason I am sitting here instead of lying in the middle of the street." Marcus looked back at his employer, and for the first time the guarded edge dropped. "You fell?" "I didn't." "You almost did," Annie said before she could stop herself. Richard gave her a side look. "I thought you were on my side." "I am. That's why I'm telling the truth." Marcus stared at her for a beat, then turned fully toward her. "Thank you, Miss Carter," she said. "Annie Carter." "Thank you, Miss Carter." His tone was polite, but Annie could feel the rest of it under the words. He was measuring her. Her coat, her worn shoes, the scratched hospital badge, the empty pain patch wrapper still crumpled in her fingers. He was trying to decide what kind of person stopped for Richard Hale without knowing he was Richard Hale. Annie suddenly wished she had gone home after the crosswalk. She wished she had not asked about his knee. She wished 3 black SUVs had not pulled up like a scene from a life she had only seen through hospital donor plaques and local news clips. "I should go," she said. Richard turned his head. "Not yet. I really should. You have people here now. That doesn't change what you did. I didn't do anything big. You crossed against a city full of impatience and stood between me and traffic. You needed help, and you gave it." Annie looked toward the hospital. The front entrance glowed across the street, and people moved in and out of it under the overhang. She thought of Linda Barrett, of the evaluation in her pocket, of the words "not ready" sitting there like a stone. She did not want to be pulled into something she did not understand. People with money had lawyers, assistants, cameras, names on buildings. Annie had bus fare, a tired mother, and a badge that still said intern. Marcus stepped closer to Richard. "Sir, we should get you to the vehicle. The board has been waiting, and your daughter is worried. The board can wait longer." "Sir." Richard raised one hand. and Marcus stopped speaking. Annie noticed that. One small movement, and a grown man in a tailored suit fell quiet. Whoever Richard Hale was, people obeyed him. Richard looked back at Annie. "Do you know who I am?" Annie hesitated. Lying seemed pointless. "I know the name. There's a wing at Street Catherine with Hale on it. My foundation helped build it. I figured. You didn't recognize me?" "No, sir." "Good." That answer confused her. "Good?" Richard adjusted his cane across his lap. The pain had not left him, but something in him had steadied since the SUVs arrived. He no longer seemed like a man stranded by his own knee. He seemed like a man reluctantly returning to a throne he did not enjoy sitting on. "Most people recognize the money before they recognize the man," he said. Annie did not know what to do with that, so she said the plainest thing. "I recognize the pain." Richard held her gaze for a moment. "Yes, you did." A woman stepped out of the second SUV, speaking rapidly into a phone. She wore a dark coat, clean lines, no wasted movement. Her hair was pulled back, and her expression carried worry sharpened into control. When she saw Richard on the bench, she ended the call immediately and crossed the path. "Dad." Richard's face tightened. "Victoria." She stopped in front of him, taking in the cane, the knee, the patch, the men waiting behind her, and Annie standing off to the side. "What happened?" "My knee acted up. You disappeared from a hospital meeting during a weather advisory, with no driver and no escort. That is not your knee acting up. I needed air. You needed a physician. I had one." Annie spoke quickly. "No, ma'am. I'm not a physician." Victoria turned to her. For 1 second, Annie saw the same look Marcus had given her, only quieter and more practiced. Victoria Hale had probably spent her life deciding who wanted access to her father and who wanted something else. Annie could almost see the question forming behind the woman's polite face. Richard answered before she asked it. "This is Annie Carter. She helped me across the street when nobody else would." Victoria's expression shifted, but not all the way into trust. "Thank you." "You're welcome, ma'am." "You work at Street Catherine?" "I'm training there." "Training?" Annie nodded. "Clinical intern." Victoria looked at the badge clipped to Annie's coat, then at Richard's knee. "And you treated him?" "I didn't treat him. I helped him sit down and used a pain patch. He should still be evaluated properly." Richard muttered, "I'm sitting right here." Annie turned to him, "And I'm saying it where you can hear it." Marcus coughed once, covering what might have been a laugh. Victoria noticed. Richard noticed too. For the first time since she arrived, Victoria's face softened a little. "You're not easily intimidated, are you, Miss Carter?" Annie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't mean any disrespect." "I didn't say you did." Richard placed both hands on the cane and began to push himself up. Annie moved without thinking, but Marcus was already there. Richard lifted one palm toward both of them. "Give me a second." The movement was slow, and pain pulled at his face again. Victoria stepped forward. "Dad." "I'm fine." Annie heard that word again, and almost shook her head. "Sir, you keep saying that like it becomes true if you say it enough." Richard paused, halfway to standing, and looked at her. "You really do talk to all stubborn people the same way, only when they keep proving my point." Marcus looked down. This time he did smile, briefly. Richard settled back onto the bench instead of standing all the way. He seemed annoyed with his own body more than anyone else. Victoria exhaled, then turned to Marcus. "Call Dr. Ellison. Tell him we're coming back through the private entrance." "No," Richard said. "Dad, no private entrance." Victoria's patience thinned. This is not the moment for symbolic humility. It is exactly the moment. Annie wished very much that she were already gone. Family arguments had a way of making strangers feel like furniture. "I'm going to head home," she said softly. Richard looked at her. "How far?" "Not far." Victoria noticed the answer was too quick. "Do you have a ride?" "I can walk." "In this weather?" "I've done it before." Richard's brow lowered. "From Street Catherine?" Annie did not answer. Marcus did. "That's not a short walk, sir." Annie gave him a look. "I didn't ask for a distance report." Richard almost smiled again, but Victoria did not. She looked at Annie more carefully now. And this time Annie felt less judged and more red. "You stopped for my father after a hospital shift, in this cold, while walking home?" Annie shrugged. "He was in pain." Victoria studied her for another second. "Most people would have kept walking." "Most people did." The words came out flat, not bitter, but true enough that no one answered right away. Richard took out his phone. "Marcus, get me Dr. Whitaker." Victoria frowned. "The hospital director?" "Yes." Annie stiffened. "Sir, please don't." Richard looked at her. "Why not?" "Because I don't want this turning into something." "It is already something." "No, it's not. You had a bad knee. I helped. That's all." "That is not all." "It has to be all." Richard's gaze narrowed, not with anger, but with attention. "Why?" Annie looked toward the hospital again. She thought of Linda Barrett's office. The evaluation. The calm way Linda had said, "Kindness is not competence." If Richard Hale called the hospital director, Linda would know. Everyone would know. And people like Annie did not always survive attention the way powerful people thought they would. "Because people talk," Annie said. "And when they talk about girls like me, they don't usually start with the truth." Victoria's face changed. She understood more than she wanted to admit. Richard held the phone lower. "Girls like you?" Annie swallowed. "Young, black, broke, temporary, helpful in the wrong place at the wrong time. People can make that sound any way they want." The wind moved through the bare trees. Richard looked from Annie to the crosswalk, then back to her. His voice dropped. "Then we will make sure they hear it the right way." Annie shook her head. "You can't control that. I can control what I say. That's different." "It's a start." His phone lit up before he could make the call. He checked the screen and answered with irritation already in his voice. "Yes, Dr. Whitaker, I'm alive." Victoria closed her eyes for a second. Marcus turned away, pretending not to listen. Richard continued, "No, I did not require an ambulance. I required common decency, and I found it outside your front door." Annie's stomach tightened. "Her name is Annie Carter," Richard said. "Clinical intern. I want her supervisor's name, her placement status, and a full copy of her evaluation on my desk by tomorrow morning." Annie stepped forward. "Mr. Hale, please." Richard raised a hand, but this time not to silence her. "To ask for one breath." "No," he said into the phone, his eyes still on Annie. "This is not charity. This is the first competent response I received all afternoon." Annie felt the words strike deeper than praise. Competent. Not sweet. Not nice. Competent. Richard listened, then his face hardened. "If anyone at Street Catherine has failed to recognize that, I want to know why." He ended the call. Annie stood there with the cold moving through her coat and fear pressing behind her ribs. Victoria looked at her father. "You just started a war with hospital administration from a park bench." Richard put the phone back into his pocket. "No. I asked a question." Marcus glanced at Annie, then at Richard. "Sir, with respect, your questions tend to arrive with lawyers behind them." Richard ignored that. Annie found her voice. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know." "Then why?" "Because you did not ask." She did not know how to answer. Richard leaned forward slightly, both hands resting over the head of his cane. "People who ask me for help usually start before they've earned my trust. You earned it before you knew there was anything to gain." Annie looked down at her old shoes. "I wasn't trying to earn anything. That is precisely the point." Victoria's voice became quieter. "Miss Carter, has your supervisor treated you unfairly?" Annie's first instinct was to protect herself with silence. Silence had kept her employed. Silence had kept her from being labeled difficult. Silence had helped her get through doors that opened only halfway. But silence had also followed her into Linda Barrett's office and stood by while the word "not ready" was placed in her file. "I don't know," Annie said at last. "Maybe she thinks she's being fair." Richard gave a dry sound. "That is not an answer. It's the safest one." Victoria looked away for a moment, then back at Annie. Something in her face had changed again. Not full trust yet, but respect had begun to take shape. Richard shifted, and pain moved through him once more. Marcus stepped forward. "Sir, we really do need to get you examined." This time Richard did not argue. "Fine." Marcus and another man helped him stand. Annie stepped back, no longer needed. That should have been a relief. Instead, she felt unsteady. Richard turned to her before moving toward the SUVs. "Annie Carter." "Yes, sir?" "Tomorrow morning. Street Catherine. Board conference room. 8 o'clock. Annie shook her head. "I have a shift." "I know. I can't just walk into a boardroom." You walked into traffic for a stranger. That's different. Yes, Richard said. A boardroom is safer. Victoria gave him a look. Not always. Richard kept his eyes on Annie. Come anyway. Annie did not promise. She could not. The whole thing felt too large, too fast, too close to the fragile parts of her life. I'll think about it, she said. Richard accepted that with a nod, as if he had expected no more. That will do for tonight. Marcus helped him toward the first SUV. Victoria paused beside Annie. For what it's worth, she said. Thank you for staying with him. Annie nodded. He shouldn't be walking alone in this cold. No, Victoria said. He shouldn't, but he often does what he wants. I noticed. For the first time, Victoria's mouth softened into something real. Then she followed her father. The SUV doors closed. Engines started. Within moments, the vehicles pulled away from the curb, leaving behind only tire marks in wet salt and the sudden absence of importance. Annie stood by the park bench, the empty wrapper still in her pocket, her hospital badge moving in the wind. Across the street, Catherine Medical Center glowed like nothing had changed, but something had. Annie reached into her coat pocket and touched the folded evaluation Linda Barrett had given her. Lacks confidence, needs supervision, not ready for official placement. She looked toward the road where Richard Hale had nearly failed to cross, then toward the hospital where people decided who was ready and who was not. For the first time that day, Annie wondered if the people writing the judgments had been wrong. Then she pulled her coat tighter and started the long walk home. Annie did not take the bus. She told herself it was because she needed the air, but the truth was simpler. She had only $11 in her wallet, and the day had already taken enough from her. The walk from Catherine to her apartment was long, especially in the cold, but Annie knew every block. She knew which corner had the broken streetlight, which storefront kept its heat running so strong that warm air leaked out when customers opened the door, which stretch of sidewalk held ice even after the rest had melted. She kept her hands in her pockets and walked with her head down against the wind. The city moved around her in pieces. A man carried takeout in a brown paper bag. A woman argued into her phone. Outside a pharmacy, a bus pulled away from the curb with a sigh, packed with people headed home to meals, televisions, family voices, quiet rooms, or nothing at all. Annie thought about Richard Hale's voice on the phone. Her name is Annie Carter, clinical intern, a full copy of her evaluation. By tomorrow morning, the words should have made her feel seen. Instead, they made her nervous. People like Richard Hale could make a call and change the temperature of a room before they entered it. Annie could not. When powerful people spoke, other people moved. When Annie spoke, she was told to be careful with her tone. She passed a diner with fogged windows. Inside, older couples sat over coffee and pie. A man in a John Deere cap laughed at something his wife said, and she tapped his hand with 2 fingers like they had been finishing each other's thoughts for 40 years. Annie slowed for half a step, then kept going. The smell of pot roast drifted out when someone opened the door. Her stomach tightened. She had crackers in her bag. That would do. By the time she reached her building, her toes were numb. The apartment house was old brick, 4 floors, no elevator. Paint peeling near the mailboxes. The radiator pipes knocked at night like someone trying to get in. Annie climbed to the 3rd floor and unlocked her door with a key that stuck unless she lifted it just right. Her room was small, but she kept it neat. A narrow bed against one wall, a folding table under the window, 2 second-hand nursing textbooks stacked beside a mug full of pens. A little lamp gave off warm yellow light. Near the bed, a framed photo of her mother sat on a crate Annie used as a nightstand. Grace Carter was smiling in the photo, wearing her church hat and a blue dress Annie had always loved. She looked stronger there than she felt now. Diabetes had taken weight from her. Grace could still turn one sentence into a place to rest. Annie took off her coat and pulled the folded evaluation from the pocket. She set it on the table without opening it. She already knew what it said. Lacks confidence, needs supervision, not ready. She heated water in a small electric kettle and opened a pack of crackers. Dinner made no sound in the room except the snap of dry edges between her fingers. Her phone buzzed. Grace Carter. Annie answered quickly. Hey, Mama. You sound cold. I just got in. From the hospital? Yes, ma'am. Did you eat? Annie looked at the crackers. I'm eating now. That better not mean crackers. Annie closed her eyes. Mama, I know your voice. Don't mama me. A tired laugh slipped out of Annie. I'll make something in a minute. Good. Because coffee and stubbornness are not food. Annie sat on the edge of the bed. I had a strange night. How strange? Annie rubbed one hand over her face. A man got stuck at the crosswalk outside the hospital. His knee was hurting bad. Everybody kept walking around him, so I helped him across. Grace was quiet for a moment. That sounds like you. I took him to the park so he could sit, used my pain patch on his knee. The one you bought for your back? Yes, ma'am. Annie, he needed it more. Grace sighed, but it was not anger. And then, Annie looked toward the evaluation on the table. Then 3 black SUVs showed up, men in suits, his daughter, his assistant. Turns out the man was Richard Hale. Grace did not answer right away. Annie waited. The Richard Hale? Grace asked. I think so. The Hale name on that hospital wing? Yes, ma'am. Grace let out a slow breath. Lord, he called the hospital director, right there from the park bench. For what? For me. Annie's voice dropped. He asked for my supervisor's name, my placement status, and a copy of my evaluation. Grace heard what Annie did not say. What happened with the evaluation? Annie picked at a loose thread on her blanket. Linda Barrett said I'm not ready for official placement. Did she say why? Professional presence, boundaries, confidence. She said kindness isn't a substitute for competence. Grace made a sound low in her throat. Some people use big words when they mean small things. Mama, what if she's right? She's not. You don't know that. I know you. That's different. No, baby. That's the part people keep forgetting. Knowing a person matters. Annie leaned forward, elbows on knees. Richard wants me in the board conference room tomorrow morning at 8. Grace did not answer at once. Annie could hear the faint hum of her mother's refrigerator through the phone, then a cough Grace tried to hide. Mama, did you take your medicine? Don't change the subject. I'm not. You are. And yes, I took it. Annie waited. Grace said, Are you scared to go? Yes. Of him? No. Of what happens after? That's honest. I don't want people saying I helped him because he's rich. I didn't know. I didn't even recognize him. Then start there. They won't care. Some won't. Some never do. But truth doesn't stop being truth because someone talks over it. Annie swallowed. If Linda finds out he called, she'll think I went around her. Did you? No. Then let her think what she wants. You cannot live your whole life trying to manage unfair people's imagination. Annie looked at the evaluation again. I've worked so hard, Mama. I know. I come early. I stay late. I do every ugly job nobody wants. I don't complain. I try to learn. And still, one woman with a pen can write me down like I'm nothing. Grace's voice softened. Listen to me. A pen can write a lie, but it cannot make that lie holy. Annie pressed her lips together. Grace continued, slower now. You helped that man before you knew his name. Before the cars. Before the suits. Before anybody could give you anything. That means what you did was clean. Don't let fear make you ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed. Then go tomorrow. Annie looked toward the window. Down on the street, a bus moved past, its windows lit, each passenger framed for a second and then gone. What if they ask me questions I can't answer? Answer the ones you can. Say I don't know when you don't. Say yes, ma'am, and no, sir, if that helps you stay steady. But don't shrink. Annie breathed out slowly. Grace added, and eat something better than crackers. That made Annie smile. Yes, ma'am. After the call, Annie sat still for a while. The room felt smaller than before, but not as heavy. She opened the evaluation and read it one more time. The words had not changed, yet they seemed less final now. Linda Barrett had written her judgment. Richard Hale had asked a question. Tomorrow, Annie would have to walk into a room where people in suits and white coats decided futures as easily as signing forms. She did not know if she was ready for that, but she had not known if Richard was ready to cross the street either. She had helped him take the first step anyway. Annie folded the evaluation, placed it beside her hospital badge, and set her alarm for 6 in the morning. Then she made oatmeal because her mother would ask, washed her face, and laid out the cleanest clothes she owned. Before turning off the lamp, she looked at the photo of Grace. I'll go, she whispered. Outside, Chicago kept moving through the cold. Inside, Annie Carter prepared to do something she had never done before. She prepared to enter a room where people expected her to be small and tell the truth anyway. By 6 the next morning, Annie was already awake. The alarm had not yet finished its first buzz before her hand reached for it. For a few seconds she lay still, listening to the radiator knock against the wall and the distant sound of traffic below her window. Chicago had not warmed overnight. A pale frost clung to the glass, and the room held that thin morning cold that made getting out of bed feel like a decision. Annie sat up anyway. On the folding table, her hospital badge rested beside the evaluation. She had placed them there before sleeping, as if the two things needed to face each other through the night. One said who she was allowed to be for now. The other said someone in power thought she was not ready. She washed at the small sink, tied her hair back, and put on the cleanest blouse she owned under her coat. It was cream-colored, a little faded at the cuffs, but pressed flat. Her black pants had been brushed twice. Her shoes were old, but she wiped them with a damp cloth until the salt marks faded. She made oatmeal because her mother would ask. She ate standing near the counter, one hand around the warm bowl, the other scrolling through a message from Grace. "Walk in with your head up. Call me after." Annie typed back, "Yes, ma'am." Then she added, "I'm scared." Her mother answered almost at once, "Good. Courage needs something to push against." Annie read that twice before slipping the phone into her pocket. The walk back to Street Catherine felt different from the walk home the night before. Same cracked sidewalks, same bus stops, same coffee shop with steam fogging the windows. But Annie noticed every step because every step took her closer to the board conference room Richard Hale had named from a park bench. The hospital rose ahead, wide and gray against the morning sky. The east entrance was busy with nurses changing shifts, patients wrapped in winter coats, staff carrying paper cups of coffee. Annie stepped through the doors and felt the warm air hit her face. For a moment, she wanted to turn toward the staff lockers, put her head down, and begin a normal shift. But normal had ended when 3 black SUVs pulled to the curb. At the security desk, Mr. Alvarez, the morning guard, looked up from his logbook. He was older, with a soft voice, and a habit of calling everyone by their last name. "Morning, Miss Carter." "Good morning." He glanced at his screen, then back at her. "You're expected upstairs." Annie felt her stomach tighten. "Already?" He gave a small nod. "12th floor. Administration." "Thank you." He lowered his voice. "Whatever it is, keep your shoulders straight." Annie blinked, surprised by the kindness. "Yes, sir." The elevator ride felt too short. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, everything was quieter than the patient floors. No rolling carts, no call bells, no hurried steps. The carpet softened sound. Framed donor photos lined the walls. At the end of the hallway, behind glass doors, a brass sign read Board Conference Suite. Annie stopped outside for one breath. Then she opened the door. A receptionist stood as if she had been waiting. "Miss Carter?" "Yes, ma'am. They're ready for you." Ready. Annie wondered if anyone inside had ever waited to be told whether they were ready. The conference room was large, with tall windows looking out toward the city. A long table filled the center. Around it sat people Annie had only seen from a distance. The hospital director, Dr. Malcolm Whitaker, 2 board members in dark suits, Victoria Hale, Richard Hale, Dr. Helen Moore, and nurse supervisor, Linda Barrett. Linda's eyes moved over Annie's blouse, her coat, her badge. Her expression tightened, but her voice stayed smooth. "Annie," she said, "this is unexpected." Annie kept her hands still at her sides. "Good morning, Nurse Barrett." Richard sat near the head of the table with his cane beside him. His right knee was wrapped now, and his face had more color than it had in the park. When he saw Annie, he did not smile widely. He simply nodded once, as if honoring a promise. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for coming." "Yes, sir." Dr. Whitaker gestured to a chair near the end of the table. "Please, have a seat." Annie sat. She placed her hands in her lap so no one would see them tighten. Victoria watched her with a calm that was not unkind, but not fully warm either. "Miss Carter, before we begin, I want to be clear. My father is grateful. We all are. But this meeting concerns hospital policy, intern evaluation, and an unusual request made under unusual circumstances. Annie nodded. I understand. One of the board members, a man with silver hair and a red tie, looked down at a folder. You are currently listed as a temporary clinical intern. Yes, sir. And your interim evaluation does not recommend official placement. Annie felt Linda's presence from across the table like a hand pressing on the room. That's what it says, Annie answered. Linda leaned forward slightly. With respect, Annie is hardworking, but she is still developing. Yesterday's incident was kind, certainly, but kindness outside the hospital cannot override clinical standards. Richard's jaw tightened. Annie saw it. Dr. Whitaker raised a hand before Richard could speak. No one is suggesting standards be ignored. I hope not, Linda said. Our patients deserve trained professionals, not emotional decisions. The words landed close to the same wound as the night before. Annie breathed once, slow. Dr. Moore, seated 2 chairs away, turned her head toward Linda. Kindness and competence are not enemies, Linda. I didn't say they were. You often speak as if they are. Linda's mouth closed. Victoria looked at Annie. Miss Carter, tell us what happened yesterday in your own words. Annie felt every face turn toward her. Her throat tightened, but she remembered her mother's message. Courage needs something to push against. She began simply. I left the hospital after my shift. I was walking home. At the crosswalk, I saw Mr. Hale standing near the curb. His knee was hurting. People were walking around him, and the signal was changing. Richard did not interrupt. Neither did anyone else. I asked if I could help him cross. He said no. A faint sound came from Marcus, who stood near the door. Richard gave him a look, and Marcus pressed his mouth flat. Annie continued. He thought I was pitying him. I wasn't. His knee locked when he tried to step, and I thought he might fall if he forced it. Linda's eyes narrowed. You diagnosed him on the street? No, ma'am. I observed him. That is not the same as assessment. No, ma'am. It isn't. But I knew enough to slow him down, support his arm, and keep him from twisting the joint. Dr. Moore gave the smallest nod. En event on. When the light changed, we waited. Then I helped him cross. After that, I took him to the park because he still couldn't walk steady. I used a pain patch. That's all. That is not all, Richard said. Annie looked at him. He placed one hand over the top of his cane. You are leaving out the part where everyone else passed by. Annie lowered her eyes for a second. That part isn't about me. It is exactly about you, Richard said, because you were the exception. The board member in the red tie cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, with respect, charitable character is admirable, but Miss Carter's placement record is still the issue before us. Richard turned to him. Then let us discuss the record. Linda opened her folder. Annie has shown effort. However, she struggles with confidence, professional boundaries, and readiness for independent placement. Dr. Moore spoke before Annie could absorb the sting again. I'd like to add my own notes. Linda looked toward her. Helen, unofficial impressions may not be appropriate here. Dr. Moore adjusted her glasses. Then it is fortunate I kept dates. She opened a folder of her own. Annie turned toward her, startled. Dr. Moore did not look at Annie. She looked at the table. October 12. Annie Carter noticed slurred speech in Mr. Raymond Ellis while transporting him from imaging. She reported it promptly. It led to a stroke evaluation. October 28. She caught a medication allergy discrepancy in a chart before a dose was administered. November 6. She stayed after shift with Mrs. Darlene Price, who was frightened before surgery and had no family present. November 9. She documented a change in breathing pattern for a patient in 318. The assigned nurse confirmed fluid buildup and called the physician. Annie could hardly breathe. Dr. Moore turned one page. There are more. Linda's face had lost some color. Those incidents were never filed as formal commendations. No, Dr. Moore said, because no one asked the people closest to the patients. Victoria leaned forward. Dr. Moore, are you saying the evaluation is incomplete? I am saying Annie Carter has been measured by how quietly she obeys, not by how carefully she serves. The room changed after that. Not loudly, but Annie felt it. Something had shifted away from Linda's paper and toward the life Annie had actually been living. Dr. Whitaker looked at Linda. Were these incidents reviewed? Linda's voice sharpened. I supervise many interns. Not every small action becomes part of a file. Richard spoke softly, but everyone heard him. Perhaps that is the problem. Annie wanted to disappear and stand taller at the same time. She did not know a person could feel both. Victoria looked at her now with less caution. "Miss Carter, why didn't you mention any of this?" Annie answered honestly. "I didn't think anyone would want to hear it from me." Dr. Moore closed her folder. "That may be the most important sentence spoken here." Richard looked toward Dr. Whitaker. "I asked for her evaluation because I suspected a mistake. Now I am asking what Street Catherine intends to do about it." Dr. Whitaker's face was careful. "We will review the file." Linda seized that. "That is the proper process." Richard nodded once. "Good. Then include the video." Annie turned to him. "Video?" Richard looked at her, then at the hospital director. "There are traffic cameras at that intersection and exterior security cameras facing the park. I would like this room to see what Miss Carter did before anyone here decides what she is worth." Annie felt the floor tilt under her. The truth of yesterday was no longer just her memory, Richard's word, or Linda's file. It was about to enter the room on a screen. Annie looked at Richard, then toward the dark screen mounted on the far wall. Video. She had not thought about cameras. Not when she stepped into the wind. Not when the man's knee locked under him. Not when drivers leaned on their horns and people slipped past as if pain were just another delay in their day. She had done what needed doing because someone had to. Now that same moment was about to be played in front of people who knew how to turn 1 second into judgment. Dr. Whitaker adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Hale, we can request the footage, but there may be privacy procedures." Richard did not raise his voice. "Then follow them quickly." Victoria leaned toward him. "Dad, we should be careful." "I am being careful." "With her?" Victoria asked, glancing at Annie. "With the truth." Linda Barrett folded her hands on the table. "I don't see how a street camera changes an internship evaluation." Dr. Moore turned to her. "It may not change the form. It may change how we read the person behind it." Linda's mouth tightened. "We are not running a hospital on sentiment." "No," Dr. Moore said. "We are supposed to run it on care." Annie kept her eyes on her hands. She could feel the room dividing itself without anyone moving. On one side were papers, policies, signatures, the kind of language that sounded clean because it kept real people at a distance. On the other was an old man at a crosswalk, a young intern in a thin coat, and a choice made before anyone knew there would be a meeting. Dr. Whitaker spoke to the receptionist through the conference phone. "Please contact security. We need exterior footage from yesterday evening, east entrance, crosswalk, and park view, approximately 5:40 to 6:20. Also contact city traffic liaison for the intersection camera if available." The receptionist's voice answered, professional and quick. "Yes, Dr. Whitaker." Richard leaned back in his chair, then winced. His knee must have pulled at him. Annie noticed. So did Victoria. "You should be in an exam room," Victoria said. "I will be. You said that yesterday." "Yesterday I had a more urgent matter." Annie looked up. "Sir, with respect, your knee is still an urgent matter." Richard turned to her. "Are you advising me again, Miss Carter?" "Yes, sir." Marcus made a small sound near the door and covered it by clearing his throat. Richard looked toward him. "Something amusing?" "No, sir. That is not your honest face." Marcus said nothing. Annie almost smiled, then stopped herself. She was still in a boardroom. Linda Barrett was still across the table. Her future still sat between strangers like a file waiting to be stamped. A few minutes passed. No one spoke much. The quiet was not empty. It was busy. Dr. Whitaker checked messages on a tablet. Victoria typed something into her phone. Linda reviewed her folder as if the correct page might protect her. Dr. Moore sat with her hands folded, patient as a church elder waiting for someone younger to finish lying to themselves. Annie thought of her mother. "Don't shrink." She lifted her chin. Linda noticed. "Annie, while we wait, perhaps you can explain something." Annie turned to her. "Yes, ma'am?" "You left hospital property after your shift. You were no longer under supervision. Yet you intervened in what you believed was a medical situation. Did you consider calling emergency services instead of handling it yourself?" Annie chose her words carefully. He was standing at a crosswalk. His knee was painful, but he was conscious, speaking, and breathing normally. I didn't think he needed an ambulance right that second. I thought he needed to get out of the street safely. That was your judgment. Yes, ma'am. Linda looked toward the others. That is exactly the concern. Judgment without authority. Dr. Moore said, she did not perform a procedure. She helped a man walk. She applied a patch. With permission, Annie said. Linda's eyes returned to her. A pain patch from your own pocket. Yes, ma'am. Not hospital, issued. No, ma. And you believe that was appropriate? Annie paused. The old Annie, the one who survived by agreeing fast, would have said no. She would have apologized, until the room felt comfortable again. But her mother's voice was still with her. I believe it was kind, Annie said, and I believe it was safe. I didn't put it on broken skin. I asked where the pain was. I didn't press on the joint. I told him he still needed proper care. Linda held her gaze. You are very confident this morning. No, ma'am, Annie said. I'm scared, but I'm answering. Richard looked at her then, and the hard line in his face eased. Victoria set down her phone. Dr. Whitaker looked up from the tablet. Linda did not seem to know what to do with that answer. The conference room door opened. A man from hospital security entered with a laptop under one arm. Dr. Whitaker, we have exterior footage from Street Catherine. City traffic camera will take longer, but our east entrance camera caught the crosswalk at an angle and the park bench clearly. Put it on the screen, Dr. Whitaker said. Annie's mouth went dry. The security officer connected the laptop. The screen flickered, then showed a grainy view of the street outside the hospital. The angle was high, looking down over the entrance, the crosswalk, part of the sidewalk, and the small park beyond. The timestamp appeared in the corner. Richard sat straighter. Annie forced herself not to look away. At first there was only ordinary movement. People leaving the hospital. Cars idling. A city bus pulling away. Then Richard appeared near the far curb. Smaller on the screen than he had seemed in life. He stood with his cane planted, one hand pressed to his knee. People moved around him. A man passed so close Richard shifted back. A woman crossed ahead of him without slowing. Two workers stepped around the cane. A driver edged forward. Richard tried to step, stopped, and gripped the cane harder. No one in the room spoke. On the screen, Annie appeared from the hospital side. She stopped. Even from that distance, it was clear. She saw him. Everyone else had seen and continued. Annie saw and changed direction. The footage showed her stepping into the crosswalk, moving toward Richard as the signal blinked. She reached him. The camera could not catch the words, but it caught her hand extended, palm open. It caught Richard refusing. It caught him trying to step and nearly folding from the pain. It caught Annie moving in, not grabbing, not panicking, but steadying him. Victoria's lips parted slightly. Marcus looked down at the floor. Linda sat very still. The signal changed on the video, and the traffic began moving. Annie did not leave. She waited with him through the light. A woman in a tan coat stopped, spoke, gestured sharply, then walked away shaking her head. Richard's shoulders stiffened. Annie stayed beside him. The next light changed. Annie offered her hand again. This time, Richard took it. The room watched them cross, slowly, painfully. Annie positioned herself toward traffic. A car edged too close, and Annie lifted her hand toward the driver. Richard paused halfway. Annie leaned closer, speaking to him. They moved again, step by step until they reached the curb. Dr. Moore's face had softened with something deeper than approval. The video continued. Annie pointed toward the park. Richard resisted. Annie stayed. Finally, they moved toward the gate. The security officer skipped to the park camera. Now the view showed the bench clearly. Annie helped Richard sit, gave him space, asked questions, checked his leg without roughness, took something from her pocket, warmed it in her hands, and placed it near his knee. Richard looked at the screen, and his expression changed. He had lived it, but watching it from outside seemed to cost him something. Maybe it showed him how close he had been to falling. Maybe it showed him how many people had decided not to care. The SUVs arrived near the end of the clip. Marcus stepped into frame, moving fast. Victoria followed. Annie stepped back as soon as Richard's people arrived. She did not crowd him. She did not reach for anyone. She did not ask for anything. The footage ended. No one rushed to speak. Annie wished someone would. The waiting felt heavier than words. Finally, Richard said, "That is what happened." Linda cleared her throat. "It shows she assisted you. No one is denying that." Richard turned to her. "It shows she saw what trained adults ignored." Linda's face tightened. "People on a sidewalk are not hospital staff. She was. She was off duty." Dr. Moore's voice cut in, calm but firm. "Character is not supposed to clock out." Annie felt that sentence move through her. Victoria looked at her father, then at Annie. "Miss Carter, when you stepped back after we arrived, why didn't you tell us who you were? Why didn't you ask for credit?" Annie frowned slightly. "Credit? You had just helped him. Most people would have made sure we knew. I thought you needed to take care of him. That mattered more." Victoria seemed to accept the answer, though it made her look unsettled. "And when my father called Dr. Whitaker, you tried to stop him." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Annie touched the edge of her badge. "Because when someone powerful helps someone like me, people don't always see the whole story. They see the powerful person first. Then they decide the rest." Richard looked at Dr. Whitaker, "And that is why this review cannot be quiet." Dr. Whitaker folded his hands. "I agree that Miss Carter's evaluation deserves reconsideration." Linda turned to him. "Malcolm," he raised one hand. "Linda, the documented incidents Dr. Moore provided should have been included. The footage supports strong judgment under pressure. At minimum, the current evaluation is incomplete." "Incomplete," Richard said. "That is a mild word. It is the word I can act on today," Dr. Whitaker replied. Richard held his gaze, then gave one short nod. Dr. Whitaker looked at Annie. "Miss Carter, pending a formal review, I am placing your application for official clinical training back under consideration. You will not be penalized for yesterday's events." Annie should have felt relief. Instead, the floor seemed unsteady under her chair. "Thank you, sir," she said. Richard leaned forward. "Not enough." Victoria said, "Dad, no, not enough." He looked around the table. The Hale Medical Foundation funds training opportunities at this hospital. If those opportunities are being filtered through bias, neglect, or personal preference, I want that reviewed. Linda's voice sharpened. "Are you accusing me of bias?" Richard did not blink. "I am asking why a young woman with documented patient care instincts was reduced to 3 cold lines on a form." Linda's face hardened. "Because I assessed her according to standards." Dr. Moore answered before Richard could. "Then perhaps the standards were used as a screen instead of a measure." Annie could hardly breathe. The meeting had moved beyond her, yet it was about her. About every hallway she had walked. Every task she had done twice, to prove she deserved once. Every time she had swallowed a correction that should have been an apology. Dr. Whitaker spoke carefully. "We will begin an internal review of intern evaluations from the last 2 cycles. Dr. Moore, I'd like you to assist. Linda, until that review is complete, I'm assigning temporary oversight of Annie's placement to Dr. Moore." Linda's chair shifted back slightly. "You're removing her from my supervision? Temporarily. That sends a message." "Yes," Dr. Whitaker said. "It does." Annie looked down before anyone could read her face. Her hands were shaking in her lap. Not because she had won. This did not feel like winning. It felt like a door opening in a wall she had been pushing against for months. Richard's voice softened. "Miss Carter," she looked up. "You did not ask for this," he said. "I know that. But fairness delayed is still something owed." Annie swallowed. "I just didn't want you to fall." "I know," he said. "That is why I trust what came after." Victoria looked at Annie with a new expression now. Not doubt. Not pity. Something closer to respect. Still cautious. But real. Dr. Whitaker closed the folder in front of him. "Miss Carter, you're excused from your morning shift. Report to Dr. Moore after lunch. We'll discuss next steps." Annie stood slowly. "Yes, sir." At the door, she stopped and turned back. "Mr. Hale?" Richard looked at her. "Please get your knee checked before your next meeting." Marcus lowered his head, hiding a smile. Richard sighed. "Yes, Miss Carter." Annie nodded once and left the room. In the hallway, the quiet felt different from when she had arrived. The donor photos still lined the wall. The carpet still swallowed her steps. But this time, Annie did not feel swallowed with it. She reached the elevator and pressed the button. Her phone buzzed. Grace, how did it go? Annie looked back toward the conference room doors, then down at the message. She typed, Mama, I think somebody finally watched. Annie stood in the elevator with her phone in both hands, reading her mother's reply. I knew they would. Eat something. She almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because Grace Carter could take a morning that had nearly split Annie open and bring it back to the practical matters of food, breath, and standing upright. The elevator doors opened on the main floor. The hospital had already returned to its usual rhythm. Stretchers moved. Coffee cups traveled in tired hands. A man in a winter hat asked where radiology was. A woman near the gift shop tried to unfold a paper map and gave up. Nobody knew Annie had just sat in a room with donors, directors, and the woman who had written her down as not ready. That was the strange part. Her whole life had shifted, but the lobby kept moving. She walked toward the cafeteria because her mother would ask again, and because her hands still trembled from the meeting. The breakfast line had thinned out. Annie bought oatmeal, a banana, and the cheapest tea. She sat at a small table near the wall and ate slowly, though she hardly tasted any of it. Halfway through, 2 nurses from the surgical floor walked past. One of them glanced at Annie's badge, then did a quick second look. That's her, the nurse whispered. The other one lowered her voice. The intern from the Hale thing? Annie kept her eyes on the tea. So it had started already. By lunchtime, people who had never spoken to Annie knew pieces of the story. Some knew she had helped Richard Hale. Some knew there had been video. Some knew Linda Barrett had been challenged in front of the board. Most knew just enough to be wrong with confidence. At 12:45, Annie reported to Dr. Helen Moore's office. Dr. Moore's office was nothing like Linda Barrett's. It was crowded with patient files, old medical journals, 2 framed photos from hospital charity events, and a small dish of peppermints near the door. A cardigan hung over the back of a chair. A coffee mug sat beside the keyboard, half full and forgotten. Dr. Moore looked up when Annie knocked. Come in, Annie. Annie stepped inside. You asked me to report after lunch. I did. Sit down. Annie sat in the chair across from the desk, keeping her back straight. Dr. Moore noticed. You can breathe in here. Annie let out a small breath. Yes, ma'am. I mean it. This office has held crying residents, angry surgeons, frightened patients, and one hospital chaplain who once spilled tomato soup on my lab coat. You are not going to break anything by breathing. That eased Annie more than she expected. Dr. Moore opened a folder. Dr. Whitaker has placed you under my temporary supervision. Official placement is still under review, but your application is active again. That means you will not be buried by that evaluation. Annie looked down at her hands. Thank you for speaking up. I should have done it sooner. Annie looked at her then. You had notes. Yes. For months? Dr. Moore held her gaze. Yes. The answer was honest, and because it was honest, it hurt. Dr. Moore leaned back. I noticed your work, Annie. I saw the way you handled patients, the questions you asked, the things others missed. But I let myself believe the system would see it too. It didn't. No, Dr. Moore said. It did not. Annie did not know what to say. Gratitude and disappointment sat too close together. Dr. Moore folded her hands. There is a lesson in that, and it is not only yours. Good people can still be late. I was late. I am sorry. Annie swallowed. Thank you for saying that. You deserve to hear it. Dr. Moore tapped the folder. Now let's talk about what happens next. You will spend 2 weeks rotating with me in rehab and geriatric care. I want to see how you handle patients with mobility issues, pain response, medication questions, and family communication. Family communication? A patient is never just a body in a bed. You know that already. But hospitals sometimes forget. Annie nodded. Dr. Moore studied her. You also need to understand something. After this morning, some people will be kind to you for the wrong reasons. Some will be cold to you for the same reason. Neither one should decide who you become. Annie thought of the nurses in the cafeteria. People are already talking. They will. Let them get tired. What if Nurse Barrett makes things harder? She has less power over your file now. That doesn't mean she has no power. Dr. Moore's face grew serious. No, it does not. Linda knows how to work through tone, scheduling, small comments, little corrections that make a person question herself. If anything happens, you tell me. Annie almost nodded, then stopped. I'm not used to telling. I know. It can make things worse. Sometimes, but silence has been making things worse quietly. That landed hard because it was true. A knock came at the door. Before Dr. Moore could answer, Linda Barrett stepped in. She held a folder against her side and wore the same controlled expression from the boardroom. Her eyes passed over Annie, then settled on Dr. Moore. "Helen, do you have a moment?" "I'm with Annie." "I can see that." Annie started to rise. "I can step out." "No," Dr. Moore said. "Stay seated." Linda's mouth tightened. This concerns intern supervision. Then it concerns Annie. For a brief second, the old order of the hospital seemed to press against the new one. Linda was used to people making room for her tone. Dr. Moore did not. Linda turned to Annie. "I hope you understand that this morning's events do not make you exempt from expectations." Annie kept her voice calm. "Yes, ma'am. You will still be evaluated." "Yes, ma'am." "And attention from a donor does not equal qualification." Dr. Moore's voice lowered. "Careful, Linda." Linda ignored the warning. "I am being clear. Hospitals cannot function if every intern believes a dramatic moment outside the building overrides months of training." Annie felt the familiar pressure to apologize, to make herself smaller, to say she never meant for any of this. All of that was true, but none of it was the whole truth. She folded her hands in her lap. "I don't think it overrides training," Annie said. "I think it showed I was using some of it." Linda looked at her as if the answer surprised her. Annie continued before fear could stop her. "I didn't ask Mr. Hale to call anyone. I didn't know who he was. I helped because he was in pain. That's all I did." Linda's eyes narrowed. "And yet here we are." "Yes, ma'am," Annie said. "Here we are." Dr. Moore said nothing, but Annie felt the doctor's attention beside her like a steady hand on her back. Linda set the folder on the desk. "These are the current intern rotation schedules. Since Dr. Whitaker is making changes, I assume you'll want them." "I do," Dr. Moore said. Linda turned toward the door, then paused. "Annie." "Yes, ma'am?" "Do not mistake visibility for protection." The words were soft enough to sound like advice, sharp enough to be something else. Dr. Moore stood. "That will be all, Linda." Linda left. The door closed. Annie's throat felt tight, but her voice stayed even. "Was that a threat?" Dr. Moore sat again. It was Linda reminding us who she is. "What do I do?" "You do your work. You document. You keep copies. You ask questions in front of witnesses when you can. And you stop carrying other people's unfairness like it is your training requirement." Annie tried to take that in. Dr. Moore opened the rotation schedule. "Your first assignment with me starts in 15 minutes. Mr. Howard in 418 needs mobility support after knee surgery. He's proud, impatient, and convinced walkers are for other people." Despite herself, Annie smiled. "Sounds familiar. I thought it might." They walked together to the 4th floor. The rehab unit moved at a different pace from the emergency department. Slower, but not easier. Pain lived here in longer sentences. Patients were learning to stand, bend, swallow, breathe, and trust their bodies again after those bodies had betrayed them. At room 418, Dr. Moore paused. "Before we go in, tell me what you look for." Annie answered without thinking too hard. "How he positions the leg. Whether he grips the bed rail too tightly. If he holds his breath before moving. Whether he jokes to cover pain. Whether he refuses help because he's scared of needing it." Dr. Moore nodded. "Good. Now say less than that when we go inside." "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Howard was in his late 70s, with a square face and a Chicago Cubs cap on the bedside table. He scowled at the walker as if it had insulted his family. "I'm not using that contraption," he said before anyone introduced themselves. Dr. Moore said, "Mr. Howard, this is Annie Carter. She's working with me today." He looked at Annie. "You the one from the video?" Annie froze for half a second. Dr. Moore's eyebrows lifted. "News travels like smoke in this building." Mr. Howard grunted. "My wife called. Said some young lady helped Hale across the street. Asked if it was the same Annie on my floor. I said I'd find out." Annie stepped closer to the bed. "Yes, sir. That was me. You made him use a cane, right?" "He already had one." "Good. Rich men need telling sometimes." Dr. Moore hid a smile by checking the chart. Mr. Howard pointed at the walker. "Don't think that means I'm using that." Annie looked at him, then at the walker. "No, sir." His suspicion eased. "No? No, you don't have to use it." Dr. Moore looked at Annie with interest but did not interrupt. Annie continued, "But if you want to get from that bed to that chair without your knee making the decision for you, it might be the easiest tool in the room." Mr. Howard considered her. "You always talk like that?" "Only when somebody is negotiating with pain." He grumbled, but when Annie positioned the walker, he let her. She did not rush him. She explained each step. She let him complain without treating the complaint like failure. When he finally stood, his hand shook on the walker, but he stayed upright. "There you go," Annie said. "That's your work, not mine." Mr. Howard breathed hard. "Feels like yours." "No, sir. I'm just here so you don't have to prove it alone." Dr. Moore watched from the foot of the bed, and this time she did not need to write anything down to remember. After the session, in the hallway, Dr. Moore said, "That is why forms can miss the point." Annie looked through the small window at Mr. Howard, now sitting in the chair and pretending not to be proud of himself. "He reminded me of Richard," Annie said. "People often do. Pain makes many personalities speak the same language." Annie nodded. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She expected her mother. Instead, the screen showed an unknown number. She answered carefully. "Hello? Miss Carter?" It was Marcus Reed. "Yes. Chairman Hale asked me to call. He wanted you to know he did have his knee examined." Annie let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "Good. He also said to tell you he followed instructions." "Did he?" Marcus paused. "Mostly. That sounds more honest." Another pause. Then Marcus said, "He would like to see you tomorrow, if you're willing." "Not in a boardroom." "His foundation office at the hospital. 10 minutes. Annie looked toward Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore said quietly, "Your choice." Annie thought of Linda's warning, "Do not mistake visibility for protection." Then she thought of Richard on the screen, standing alone while everyone passed. "What does he want?" Annie asked. Marcus's voice softened a little. "I think he wants to say thank you properly." Annie looked down the hallway, where patients moved slowly with nurses beside them, each step small and hard-won. 10 minutes, she said. "That's all I can promise." "I'll tell him." The call ended. Dr. Moore watched her. "You all right?" Annie slipped the phone into her pocket. "I don't know yet." "That is allowed." Annie looked back toward room 418. Mr. Howard had picked up his Cubs cap and placed it on his head like he had won something. Maybe he had. Annie straightened her badge and followed Dr. Moore down the hall. For the first time in months, the word intern did not feel like a warning. It felt like a beginning. The next morning, Annie arrived at Street Catherine 10 minutes early. She told herself it was because the walk had gone faster than usual, but that was not true. She had left home before she needed to because waiting in her apartment had felt worse than walking into the cold. At least walking gave her something to do with her fear. The hospital lobby was busy with the usual morning traffic. Nurses came in with coffee, patients checked appointment slips, volunteers in red vests pointed people toward elevators. Nothing about the place suggested that Annie Carter had spent the previous day sitting in the board conference room while powerful people replayed a video of her helping Richard Hale across the street. But people knew. A clerk at the front desk looked up and smiled too quickly. A transporter nodded at her like they had spoken before, though they had not. Near the gift shop, 2 administrative assistants paused their conversation as she passed. Annie kept walking. Dr. Moore had told her to meet Richard in the Hale Foundation office on the 2nd floor, just off agents that the main corridor that connected the original hospital building to the newer wing. Annie had passed that office many times. She had never gone inside. The hallway changed before the door did. The floors were cleaner there, the lighting softer, the walls lined with framed photos from ribbon cuttings and charity dinners. In one photo, Richard Hale stood beside Dr. Whitaker, both men holding oversized scissors in front of a blue ribbon. In another, Victoria Hale stood with a group of surgeons under a sign that read, Hale Mobility Center. Annie slowed near that one. Mobility. She thought of Richard's cane on wet pavement, of his pride cracking under pain, of his voice when he said most people recognized the money before the man. "Miss Carter?" Marcus Reed stood beside a glass door, dressed in a dark suit, earpiece in place. He looked less alarmed than he had in the park, but no less alert. "Good morning," Annie said. "Good morning. Chairman Hale is expecting you. He knows I only have 10 minutes, right?" Marcus almost smiled. I reminded him twice. "And?" "He heard me once." Annie gave him a look. Marcus opened the door. "That's better than usual." The office was not as large as Annie expected. It had a desk, 2 chairs, a small conference table, and a window facing the hospital courtyard. On a treasure. Richard sat near the window with his right knee supported on a low stool. The knee was wrapped properly now. He wore a dark sweater instead of a suit jacket, and for the first time he looked less like a name on a building and more like a man who had been told by a doctor to rest and did not appreciate it. You came, he said. I said 10 minutes. So I've been warned. Marcus stepped inside but stayed near the door. Richard glanced at him. You can wait outside. Miss Hale said I should remain nearby. Nearby is outside. Marcus hesitated, then left the door slightly open as he stepped out. Annie remained standing. Richard gestured toward the chair. Please sit. I'm fine. That word again. She sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Annie looked at the folder with her name on it and felt the same tightness return to her chest. Richard noticed. That folder is not a trap. People don't usually label traps. His mouth moved, almost amused. Fair point. Annie folded her hands in her lap. Mr. Hale, if this is about yesterday, I'm glad your knee got checked. I'm glad you're all right. But I don't want special treatment. That is not what I'm offering. What are you offering? A correction. That sounds like special treatment with a better suit. Richard took that in without offense. You speak carefully, but not timidly. I've had practice. At being careful? At not giving people reasons to misunderstand me. His face sobered. Because people often do. Annie looked toward the window. In the courtyard below, 2 older patients sat under blankets while a volunteer adjusted one man's scarf. Yes, sir, she said. Often enough. Richard nodded as if that confirmed something he already knew and disliked. Yesterday, when I called Dr. Whitaker, you tried to stop me because you feared what people would say. I still do. They will say things. That doesn't make me feel better. It was not meant to. It was meant to be honest. Annie looked at him then. Then let me be honest too. I don't want to become some story people tell at fundraising dinners. Poor black intern helps rich man. Rich man saves her. That makes it sound like I was waiting on somebody powerful to notice me. Richard's eyes held hers. Were you? No. Good. Because that is not the story. Then what is? A young woman used training, judgment, and compassion when everyone else decided inconvenience was a good enough excuse to keep walking. Annie's throat tightened, but she kept her face steady. Richard reached for the folder but did not open it. I reviewed Dr. Moore's notes. Annie said nothing. You have been doing more than your evaluation showed. Dr. Moore said that. She was right. Annie looked down at her hands. It still feels strange hearing people say it out loud. Why? Because when you go long enough without being defended, you start thinking maybe there's nothing worth defending. Richard did not answer quickly. When he did, his voice had lost some of its sharpness. That is a cruel thing for a place of healing to teach anyone. Annie gave a small shrug. Hospitals are still run by people. Yes, Richard said. And people can build beautiful wings while missing the person holding the door open. The line might have sounded polished from someone else. From Richard, it sounded like regret. He opened the folder and slid one page toward her. Annie did not touch it at first. What is that? A proposal? I thought you said this wasn't a trap. It is not. Read it before you argue. I can argue while reading. I'm beginning to understand that. Despite herself, Annie picked up the page. The heading read, Hale Foundation Clinical Training Support Grant. She read the first lines and felt her pulse climb. Full tuition support for continued clinical training. Monthly living stipend for 1 year. Transportation allowance. Health coverage assistance. Review for placement in the Hale Mobility Center internship track under Dr. Helen Moore. Annie set the paper down as if it had become hot. No. Richard did not look surprised. That was quick. I can't take this. You can. No, sir. I can't. Why? Because it's too much. For whom? For me. That is not an answer. It's the only one I have. Richard leaned back, careful with his knee. Miss Carter, my foundation spends millions each year on programs with less evidence of impact than what I saw in that video. I'm not a program. No, he said. You are a person. That is why this matters. Annie stood. Sitting made her feel cornered. I helped you cross the street. That doesn't mean you owe me my future. Richard's voice stayed level. I do not owe you your future, but I can remove some things blocking it. That sounds easy when you're the one with power. Yes, he said. It is easy for me to write a check. That is why I am not asking you to be impressed by it. I am asking you not to let pride refuse what justice should have offered before I ever met you." Annie did not speak. From the hallway, a cart rolled by. Someone laughed softly outside the door. Then the sound faded. Richard placed one hand over the folder. "You did not help me because I was rich. No. You did not know my last name. No. You did not ask for money, attention, or a favor. No. Then why should the truth of your heart be changed by the size of my bank account?" Annie looked away. He continued, quieter now. "A gift can insult a person if it is meant to buy them. This is not that. This is an investment in someone the system nearly overlooked. My supervisor will say I got rewarded for making her look bad. Your supervisor made herself look bad." Annie almost smiled, but the worry remained. People will still talk. "Let them," Richard said, "but give them something worth talking about." "What does that mean?" "It means become so good at the work that gossip grows tired trying to keep up." That reached her more than the money, maybe because it sounded less like rescue and more like challenge. Annie sat again, slowly. Richard slid a second page toward her. "There is another condition." Her guard returned. "What condition?" "You will meet with Dr. Moore and me once a month, not for gratitude, for accountability. If the program is failing you, we fix it. If you are failing the work, Dr. Moore tells you, directly. That sounds fair." "It is intended to be." "And my mother?" Richard paused. "Dr. Moore mentioned you have family medical expenses." Annie's face changed. She shouldn't have. She did not give details. She said stress outside the hospital can break promising trainees before they get a chance. Annie swallowed. "The grant includes emergency family health support," Richard said. "It is available to all selected recipients, not only you. I will not make your mother a private charity case." Annie appreciated that more than he knew. "Thank you." "Is that a yes?" "It's not a no. For today, I will take that." The door opened before Annie could answer. Victoria Hale stepped in, holding a file and a phone. She stopped when she saw Annie. "Miss Carter," she said. "Ma'am." Victoria looked at the papers on the table, then at her father. "You showed her the grant?" "I did." "And?" "She has not run away." "That is progress." Annie looked between them. "Does everybody in this family talk like I'm not sitting here?" Victoria blinked, then gave a small, real smile. "Only when we're nervous." That surprised Annie. "You're nervous?" Victoria closed the door behind her. "My father trusts quickly when his conscience is involved. I trust slowly, because I've seen what people do when his money enters a room." Richard's face hardened. "Victoria." "No, Dad. She deserves honesty too." Victoria turned to Annie. "Yesterday I wondered if you were another person who saw an opportunity." Annie held her breath. "I was wrong," Victoria said. "The video made that clear. So did the fact that you tried to stop him from calling Dr. Whitaker." Annie looked down. Victoria set her file on the table. "I'm sorry. It was not a grand apology. It did not need to be. It was direct, and that gave it weight." "Thank you," Annie said. Victoria nodded. "If you accept the grant, I'll help structure it so it cannot be used to make you look purchased. Clear criteria. Public announcement tied to a wider scholarship track. You will be the first recipient, not the only recipient." Annie looked at Richard. "That was your idea?" "No," he said. "That was hers." Victoria added, "The program should have existed already." Annie touched the edge of the paper. "Other interns could apply?" "Yes," Victoria said. "Interns from low-income backgrounds, especially those entering patient care fields. It would consider supervisor review, patient feedback, documented service, and faculty recommendation. Not just grades. Not just grades." Annie thought of Mr. Howard gripping the walker. Of the veteran who thanked her for making him feel like somebody. Of patients who needed hands steady enough to help and voices patient enough to explain. She breathed in. "I'll review it with Dr. Moore," Annie said. "And my mother." Richard nodded. "Good. But I won't be anyone's poster girl." Victoria answered before Richard could. "Then help us build it so nobody can turn you into one." Annie looked at her and saw, for the first time, not just suspicion or status, but a woman trying to do a difficult thing correctly. Her phone buzzed. Annie checked the time and stood. "My 10 minutes are up." Richard glanced at the clock. "It has been 18. I knew you weren't listening to Marcus. Victoria smiled faintly. Richard looked almost pleased. Annie gathered the papers but did not fold them. I need to get to Dr. Moore. At the door, Richard called her name. She turned. Miss Carter. Yes, sir. Yesterday, you helped me cross a street. Today, you may have helped us see a door we should have opened years ago. Annie did not know what to do with words that large, so she gave him the simplest truth she had. Just make sure it opens for more than me. Then she stepped into the hallway, carrying the grant papers against her chest. No longer sure whether the weight in her hands was fear, hope, or both. Annie found Dr. Moore in the rehab unit, standing beside the nurse's station with a chart tucked under one arm and reading glasses low on her nose. You're late, Dr. Moore said. Annie checked the clock. 8 minutes. 18, according to Marcus. Annie stopped. He told you? He called to say Chairman Hale kept you longer than promised and that it was not your fault. That man reports everything. That is why he still has a job. Dr. Moore nodded toward the papers in Annie's arms. Is that what I think it is? Annie held them a little tighter. Grant proposal. Full support? Looks like it. Living stipend? Yes. Training track? With you. Dr. Moore took off her glasses. And how do you feel? Like somebody handed me a ladder and I'm worried it might turn into a leash. That is a wise concern. Annie looked relieved that Dr. Moore had not dismissed it. Richard said it's not charity. Victoria said they can structure it as a real scholarship. Not just something for me. That would be better. I told them I'd review it with you and my mother. Good. We will read every line. Annie looked down the hall, where a patient moved slowly between parallel bars while a therapist walked beside him. Do you think I should accept it? Dr. Moore leaned against the counter. I think you should not let fear make the decision. I also think gratitude should not sign paperwork without counsel. That sounds like a yes and no. It is a doctor's answer. We are trained to complicate things. Annie smiled, but only for a second. Linda will use it against me. Linda will use breakfast against you if it suits her. That's not comforting. It was not meant to be. It was meant to be accurate. Dr. Moore placed her glasses in her coat pocket. Listen carefully, Annie. There are two kinds of help. One makes you smaller so the giver can feel tall. The other gives you room to stand. You need to learn the difference. How? By asking what strings are tied to it, by seeing who else benefits, by making sure it does not ask you to become silent. Annie looked at the papers again. I don't want to be silent. Then don't sign anything that requires it. Before Annie could answer, a voice cut in from behind them. Well, there she is. Annie turned. Linda Barrett stood near the end of the nurse's station, holding a tablet. She wore navy scrubs and the same controlled expression she had carried into every room Annie had ever seen her enter. Two nurses nearby found reasons to busy themselves with charts, though both kept listening. Dr. Moore's face did not change. Linda's eyes moved to the papers in Annie's arms. I heard you had a private meeting with the Hales. Annie kept her voice steady. Yes, ma'am. During hospital hours? Dr. Moore knew. I did, Dr. Moore said. Linda nodded slowly. Of course. The word carried more than agreement. Annie waited. She had learned that Linda often left empty spaces in conversation for other people to fill with apologies. This time, Annie let the space remain empty. Linda looked at the badge on Annie's coat. You understand that attention can fade quickly. When it does, work remains. Yes, ma'am. And work is not done by donors. No, ma'am. It is done by discipline. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Moore's voice stayed mild. Do you need something, Linda? I need room 421 reassigned. Staffing changed. Dr. Moore glanced at the board. Mrs. Keller? Yes. Annie can take her vitals and mobility notes. Dr. Moore looked at Annie. Mrs. Keller is post-op hip repair. Mild confusion. Anxious with new staff. Are you comfortable? Annie nodded. Yes, ma'am. Linda's mouth tightened just enough to show she had hoped for hesitation. Make sure everything is documented. Annie met her eyes. I will. Linda left without another word. Dr. Moore waited until she was out of earshot. That was a test. I know. You passed by not turning it into a fight. I wanted to. That is allowed too, just not always useful. Room 421 was near the end of the hall. Mrs. Keller sat in bed with a pale blue blanket over her lap. Her silver hair brushed back neatly, one hand gripping the rail. A breakfast tray sat untouched beside her. The television was on but muted. Annie knocked softly. "Mrs. Keller? My name is Annie. Dr. Moore asked me to check on you." The woman looked up. Her eyes were tired and wary. "Are you the new girl? I'm one of the interns. I don't want to walk." "That's all right. I didn't ask you to." Mrs. Keller's grip loosened a little. "They keep asking. People do that in hospitals. I'm not ready." Annie stepped inside but stayed near the foot of the bed. "Then we start with what you are ready for. Can I check your blood pressure?" Mrs. Keller looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Annie moved calmly. She explained each action before doing it. Cuff on the arm. Feet supported. Deep breath. No hurry. Mrs. Keller watched her hands. "You're the one on the video," Mrs. Keller said. Annie kept the cuff in place. "People have been saying that today. My daughter showed me. On her phone. Someone from the lobby posted part of it." Annie paused. "Posted it?" "Not all of it. Just the SUVs and the man calling him chairman. People like that sort of thing." Mrs. Keller's mouth pulled down. "They missed the important part." Annie removed the cuff. "What part is that?" "The hand," Mrs. Keller said. "You gave him your hand before the cars came." Annie wrote down the reading because it gave her something to do with the feeling in her chest. "His knee hurt." Mrs. Keller gave a small nod. "My husband had knees like that. Proud man. Would rather argue with stairs than use a rail." "Sounds familiar." "Men can be foolish." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Keller gave her a quick look, then laughed softly. The laugh loosened something in the room. Annie checked the incision notes, asked about pain, and adjusted the blanket so it did not pull against the hip. Mrs. Keller watched her more openly now. "You said you weren't asking me to walk," Mrs. Keller said. "I'm not. Then why do I feel like you're about to?" "Because you're wise." Mrs. Keller snorted. "Careful." Annie smiled. "How about this? We don't walk. We sit up straighter, put both feet on the floor, and see how that feels. If you hate it, you can tell me. I can already tell you I'll hate it. Then you'll be prepared." By the time Dr. Moore came in, Mrs. Keller was sitting at the edge of the bed with both feet planted, annoyed but steady. Dr. Moore's eyebrows lifted. "Well," Mrs. Keller pointed at Annie. "She tricked me." "I did not," Annie said. "I negotiated. She talks like my sister." "Is that good?" "No, but it works." Dr. Moore hid a smile. "Pain level?" "Still there," Mrs. Keller said. "But I'm sitting, aren't I?" "You are." Annie documented everything, including the patient's reluctance, the steps taken, the response, and the plan to reassess. She wrote more carefully than usual, remembering Dr. Moore's words. "You document. You keep copies." When they stepped into the hallway, Dr. Moore looked at the notes. "Good. Clear. Specific. No drama." That last part was for Linda. "It should be for you too. Good notes. Protect good work." They spent the next several hours moving from room to room. Annie helped a man practice standing after surgery. She sat with a woman who feared going home alone. She showed a patient how to use a walker without feeling defeated by it. Everywhere she went, pieces of the video seemed to arrive before her. Some patients mentioned it. Some staff pretended not to know. A few gave her too much praise in a way that made her uncomfortable. Others cooled the moment she entered. By mid-afternoon, Annie understood what Dr. Moore meant. Kindness for the wrong reason could feel almost as heavy as suspicion. Near the end of shift, she walked into the supply room and found two interns whispering over a phone. One of them, Paige, looked up too late. Annie stopped. "Is that the video?" Paige's face reddened. "Somebody sent it in the group chat." The other intern, Mark, shrugged. "It's everywhere in the hospital now." "Great," Annie said. Paige lowered the phone. "I'm sorry. I wasn't laughing at you. What were you doing?" "I don't know. Watching, I guess." Mark leaned against the shelf. "Must be nice." Annie turned to him. "What?" "To have Hale notice you. Some of us work hard too." Paige said. "Mark." "No, I'm just saying. One viral moment, and suddenly everything changes." Annie felt the old heat rise in her throat. She thought of apologizing. Then she thought of Mrs. Keller sitting at the edge of the bed. "You think I planned that?" Annie asked. "I think lucky things happen to some people. It wasn't luck when he couldn't cross." "No, but it worked out for you." Annie stepped closer, not angry in volume, but clear. "I was walking home in the cold after being told I wasn't ready for a job I've been working toward for months. I helped a man because he was hurting. If you want to call that lucky, go ahead. But don't skip the part where everyone else could have done it too. Mark looked away first. Paige whispered, Annie, I'm sorry. Annie picked up the supplies she needed. Don't be sorry. Just be careful what story you tell. She left before her voice could shake. In the hallway, Dr. Moore was waiting as if she had heard enough to know, but not enough to embarrass her. Hard day? Dr. Moore asked. Annie breathed out. Long enough. That phrase is becoming yours. It fits too many things. Dr. Moore handed her a sealed envelope. This came from Dr. Whitaker's office. Official notice. You don't have to open it here. Annie stared at it. Is it bad? I don't know, but you are still standing either way. Annie took the envelope and slipped it into her bag. I'll open it at home. Good. And Annie? Yes, ma'am? You answered Mark well. Annie closed her eyes briefly. You heard. Enough. I didn't mean to sound bitter. You sounded truthful. There is a difference. Annie nodded, though she was not sure she believed it yet. That evening, she walked home with the envelope in her bag, and the grant papers folded beside it. The city felt colder than it had that morning. Her phone buzzed 3 times with messages from people who had suddenly remembered her number. She did not answer. Inside her apartment, she took off her coat, washed her hands, and placed both documents on the table, Richard Hale's grant proposal and the hospital envelope. She called her mother before opening either one. Grace answered on the second ring. Did you eat? Annie laughed under her breath. Hello to you too. Food first, fear second. Mama, I'm serious. I'll eat after. No. You will put something in a bowl. Then you will open whatever is making your voice sound like that. Annie obeyed. Oatmeal again. She set it on the table, then opened the hospital envelope while Grace stayed on the line. Her eyes moved across the page. Temporary supervision reassigned to Dr. Helen Moore. Application reactivated. Formal review pending. No disciplinary action. Annie read the last line twice. Grace waited. Baby? They didn't close my file, Annie said. Grace exhaled. Good. It's not official yet, but it's open. Annie looked at the grant proposal beside the letter. One door open. Another offered. Neither one. Simple. Yes, she said softly. It's open. Outside, traffic moved through the cold Chicago night. Inside, Annie sat with a bowl of oatmeal, a hospital letter, and a decision waiting beside her. For the first time, the future did not look easy, but it no longer looked locked. Annie did not sign the grant proposal that night. She read it 3 times, once by herself, once out loud to her mother, and once with a notebook beside her so she could write down every question that made her uneasy. Grace listened through the phone, stopping her whenever Annie tried to rush past a paragraph. Read that part again, Grace said. Mama, it's legal language. That means it was written by people who get paid to hide sharp corners in soft words. Read it again. Annie read the section about eligibility, the monthly stipend, the training track, and the family health support. None of it sounded like a trap, but that did not make her trust it. Good things had not arrived often in her life, and when they did, they usually came with paperwork, conditions, or disappointment, hiding somewhere near the bottom. Grace let her finish, then said, What scares you most? Annie looked at the paper. That people will think I'm being bought. Are you? No. Then what else? That maybe I'll accept this, and then every room I walk into, people will see Richard Hale before they see me. Some will. That's supposed to help? It's supposed to be true. Some people saw your skin before your name. Some saw your badge before your work. Some saw your age before your sense. Folks who want to see wrong will find a window. Annie leaned back in the chair and rubbed her forehead. Then why accept anything? Because refusing a good door does not punish unfair people. It only keeps you outside. Annie let that sit. Grace's voice softened. Baby, pride can keep a person warm for a minute, but it cannot pay tuition, buy medicine, or teach you what you were born to learn. I don't want to owe him. You owe him honesty. You owe the work your best. You do not owe anyone your soul. Annie looked toward the window. The glass showed her own reflection. Tired eyes, hair tied back, hospital badge still clipped to the coat hanging beside the door. She thought about Richard on the bench, angry at his own knee, angry at needing help, angry at the world for watching. She thought about how quickly she had recognized that anger because she carried her own version of it. What if accepting help changes me? Annie asked. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then make sure it changes the part of you that's been surviving, not the part of you that stayed kind. The next morning, Annie brought the grant papers to Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore did not skim them. She closed her office door, cleared a space on her desk, put on her reading glasses, and read each page, like she expected the paper to confess, if watched long enough. Annie sat across from her, hands folded, trying not to tap her foot. After 10 minutes, Dr. Moore said, "This is well structured." That means good? It means careful. Victoria Hale did her job. She said it would become a scholarship track, not just something for me. It says that here. First recipient, pilot year, criteria to expand the program after review, faculty recommendation required, patient care documentation considered, supervisor evaluation included, but not treated as the only measure. Annie noticed the last part. Not the only measure. Important sentence. Linda won't like it. No. Linda likes single doors because she knows who holds the key. Annie let out a breath. So you think it's safe? I think it is safe enough to consider seriously. I also think you should ask for 2 changes. Annie sat straighter. What changes? First, no public use of your image, name, or personal story without your written approval. Second, family health support must be administered through the General Scholarship Fund, not as a private favor to you. Victoria said that. Good. Put it in writing anyway. Annie nodded and wrote both down. Dr. Moore removed her glasses. Do you want this, Annie? The question was simple enough to hurt. Annie looked at the papers. I want the chance. I don't know if I want all the attention wrapped around it. That is not the same answer. No. So separate them. Accept the chance. Set boundaries around the attention. Annie gave a small smile. You make it sound easy. It will not be easy. It will be adult. Before Annie could answer, a knock came at the door. Dr. Moore called for them to enter. Marcus Reed stepped in, holding a folder and a paper cup of coffee. He looked at Annie first, then Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore, Miss Carter. Mr. Reed, Dr. Moore said, you are becoming a regular visitor. I apologize. Chairman Hale asked me to deliver revised documents. Miss Hale added the privacy clauses Miss Carter requested. Annie blinked. I didn't request them yet. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Miss Hale anticipated that Dr. Moore would. Dr. Moore looked pleased, despite trying not to. Smart woman. Marcus placed the folder on the desk. Also, Chairman Hale asked whether Miss Carter had eaten breakfast. Annie closed her eyes. Did my mother talk to him? No, Marcus said, but he has become aware that people around you ask that question often. Dr. Moore took the folder. Tell Chairman Hale that Miss Carter is not to be managed like a corporate project. I will phrase that more gently. Do not. Marcus nodded once. Understood. Annie looked at the coffee cup in his hand. Is that for me? No, for Dr. Moore. Chairman Hale said she sounded like someone who drinks hospital coffee and pretends it's acceptable. Dr. Moore reached for it. For once, he is medically correct. Marcus turned to leave, then paused. Miss Carter, Miss Hale also asked me to say she is available at noon if you want to review the documents directly. No pressure. Annie almost laughed at the phrase, no pressure. Nothing about the Hales felt pressure-free. Still, she nodded. I'll meet her. At noon, Foundation office. When Marcus left, Dr. Moore opened the revised folder. Good. They are moving fast. Too fast? For bureaucracy, yes. For justice, perhaps not. The morning passed in patient rooms. Annie tried to focus on work because work made more sense than sudden opportunity. Mrs. Keller sat in a chair for 20 minutes and complained for 19 of them. Miss Howard took 6 steps with the walker and called it a parade. A retired school secretary named Mrs. Donnelly asked Annie to read the large print on her discharge instructions, then corrected the grammar of every sentence. You should work for the hospital, Mrs. Donnelly said. I do, ma'am. No, I mean work where they listen to you. Annie tucked that away. At noon, she went to the Foundation office. Victoria Hale was waiting at the small conference table with 2 copies of the revised grant. She had removed the sharp edge from her voice, but not the precision. Annie appreciated that. Warmth was good. Clarity was better. "Miss Carter," Victoria said, "thank you for coming. Thank you for adding the clauses. I should have included them first." Annie sat. "Why didn't you?" Victoria considered the question. "Because people in my world often assume consent comes with gratitude." Annie did not answer. Victoria looked down at the papers. That was not meant as an excuse. "I know." They reviewed the grant line by line. Victoria explained the stipend, the training expectations, the academic requirements, the privacy clause, the health support fund, and the process for future applicants. Annie asked every question from her notebook. Victoria answered without irritation. When Annie reached the family health support section, her voice slowed. "My mother won't be named?" "No. Her care would be covered through an emergency support category available to scholarship recipients. No press, no donor dinner, no personal display." "Good." Victoria's expression softened. "You protect her. She's had enough people discuss her life like paperwork." Victoria nodded. "Then we won't." Annie turned the page. "What do you need from me?" "Your signature, if you choose." Continued work with Dr. Moore. Monthly review. And honesty. If anyone connected to this foundation makes you feel used. That includes your father? Victoria's mouth curved slightly. "Especially my father." Richard's voice came from the doorway. "I heard that." Annie turned. Richard stood there with his cane, Marcus behind him, looking mildly annoyed and properly checked by a doctor. Victoria gave him a look. "You were supposed to rest." "I am resting. Standing is not running." "Dad." He sighed and came in slowly. "Miss Carter, I will not interrupt. I only wanted to say one thing." Annie waited. Richard placed one hand on the back of a chair. "If you sign, do it because the work matters. Not because of me. Not because you feel grateful. Not because people expect a touching ending. Sign only if this helps you become what you were already trying to become." Annie looked at him, then at Victoria, then down at the papers. She thought of the cold crosswalk, the hand she offered, the hand he finally took. She thought of Linda's evaluation, Dr. Moore's notes, her mother's medicine, the patients who needed someone to notice when pain hid behind pride. Then she picked up the pen. Her hand trembled, but not enough to stop her. She signed her name, Annie Carter. Victoria signed next as foundation representative. Dr. Moore would sign later as supervising physician. Richard did not sign that page. Annie noticed. "You don't sign?" she asked. "No," Richard said. "This should not rest on my mood." That was the first thing about the paperwork that made Annie feel safer. Victoria gathered the pages. "I'll file this today. Officially, you are the first recipient of the Hale Foundation Clinical Training Support Grant. Public announcement will wait until the broader scholarship track is ready and until you approve language." Annie nodded. "Thank you." Richard looked at her. "How do you feel?" Annie thought about lying, then decided against it. "Like I just stepped into another crosswalk." Richard's face softened. "Then we will make sure the light lasts longer this time." Annie stood, smoothing her coat. "I need to get back to Dr. Moore." Victoria extended her hand. Annie took it. "Welcome to the program, Miss Carter." "Thank you, ma'am." Richard did not offer his hand right away. Instead, he said, "One more thing." Annie braced herself. "I had a proper medical evaluation. Severe inflammatory flare. No fracture." "Good." "I am using a prescribed brace." "Good." "And Marcus has been unbearable about stairs." Marcus said from the doorway. "Accurate." Annie smiled. "Then listen to Marcus." Richard looked wounded. "After all this, you take his side?" "When he's right." Victoria gave a quiet laugh. For a moment, the room felt almost ordinary. Not simple, not fixed, but human. Then Annie's phone buzzed. A message from Grace. "Did you eat before signing anything?" Annie smiled down at the screen. She typed back, "Yes, ma'am." And I signed. The reply came fast. Then stantal. Annie slipped the phone into her pocket and walked back into the hospital corridor with the same old shoes, the same scratched badge, and a future that had not been handed to her like charity. It had been opened like a door, and this time, Annie did not apologize for walking through. By the time Annie returned to the rehab unit, the signed grant no longer felt like paper. It felt like something alive tucked inside the day, moving with her through every hallway. Dr. Moore did not ask for details right away. She only looked at Annie's face, then at the clock. You signed, she said. Annie stopped near the nurse's station. How did you know? You're standing like someone who made a hard choice and survived it. I'm not sure I survived it yet. You are here. That counts. Annie slipped a fresh pair of gloves into her pocket. Victoria added the privacy language. The support from my mother goes through the general fund. Richard doesn't sign off personally. Good. I thought that would make me feel less scared. Did it? A little. Then a little is enough for today. The day did not slow down for Annie's nerves. Mrs. Keller needed help transferring from bed to chair. Mr. Howard refused the walker until Annie asked if he wanted to tell his knee or let his knee tell him. A man recovering from a stroke grew frustrated because his right hand would not close around a cup. Annie stayed beside him, not filling the silence with false cheer, only waiting until he was ready to try again. Near 3 o'clock. Dr. Whitaker's office sent an email to department heads announcing a formal review of intern evaluation procedures. The words were careful. The meaning was not. All current and recent intern assessments would be examined for consistency, documentation, and supervisory bias. By 3:30, everyone knew. Annie felt it before anyone said anything to her. Conversations stopped when she turned corners. Nurses who had been friendly became too friendly. Others suddenly found charts interesting when she walked past. The hospital had its own weather, and Annie could feel the pressure changing. She was at the supply cabinet counting wound dressing packs when Paige appeared beside her. Hey, Paige said. Annie looked up. Hey. Paige held a stack of clean towels, though she did not seem to remember why. I heard about the review. So did half the building. Probably more than half. Annie returned to counting. Did you need something? Paige shifted her weight. I wanted to say I'm sorry about yesterday. With Mark. I should have said something sooner. You did say something. Not enough. Annie closed the cabinet. You don't have to make up for him. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to make up for me. That made Annie pause. Paige lowered her voice. When Linda put you on extra work, I noticed. When she blamed you for the discharge papers last week, I knew Mark had moved the folder. I didn't say anything because I didn't want her watching me next. Annie felt the old anger rise, but it was tired now. So you watched her watch me instead. Paige's face flushed. Yes. Annie turned the words over. They hurt because they were plain. Thank you for telling me. That's it? What do you want me to say? I don't know. I thought you'd be mad. I am. Paige looked down. But I'm also not surprised, Annie said. That's the sad part. Paige gripped the towels. Dr. Moore is asking interns for written statements. I'm going to tell her what I saw. Annie studied her. Because it's safe now? Paige did not answer quickly. Maybe. Partly. But also because it's true. Annie nodded once. Then tell the truth clean. Don't dress it up to make yourself look better. Paige swallowed. I won't. After Paige left, Annie stood with one hand on the cabinet handle. She wanted to feel satisfied, but all she felt was the cost of delayed honesty. People often waited until a door opened before admitting someone else had been locked out. When she returned to the hall, Linda Barrett was waiting near the charting station. Annie, the way Linda said her name had changed, not warmer, more precise, as if each syllable had to be handled in front of witnesses. Yes, ma'am, I need to speak with you. Dr. Moore, who was reviewing notes at the nurse's station, looked up. Here is fine. Linda's eyes moved toward her. This is a private matter. If it involves Annie's training, here is fine, Dr. Moore said. The staff nearby became very interested in screens and clipboards. Linda held a folder against her chest. I want to make something clear. The review is administrative. It does not mean any conclusion has been reached. Annie kept her voice steady. I understand. I have supervised many interns. Some thrive. Some struggle. When I assess readiness, I do so based on standards, not personal preference. Dr. Moore said nothing. Annie waited. Linda continued. You may feel singled out because expectations were placed on you, but expectations are not discrimination. Annie felt the familiar pull to nod, to let Linda define the room and everyone inside it. Instead, she asked, were the expectations the same for all of us? Linda's face tightened. That is what the review will determine. That wasn't my question. A nurse at the desk stopped typing for half a second. Linda's voice lowered. Be careful, Annie. Annie's hands stayed at her sides. I am being careful. That's why I'm asking clearly. Dr. Moore stepped closer, but Annie did not need rescuing this time. Linda looked at the people nearby, then back at Annie. I will provide my documentation. Good, Annie said. I will provide mine. Linda's eyes narrowed. Yours? Yes, ma'am. Dates, tasks, shift changes, corrections, patient notes. Dr. Moore said good notes, protect good work. Dr. Moore made no attempt to hide the approval on her face. For the first time since Annie had known her, Linda Barrett seemed unsure which tone to use. Then I suppose the process will speak for itself. I hope so, Annie said. Linda turned and walked away. Annie released a breath she had been holding. Dr. Moore came beside her. You handled that well. My knees disagree. Knees are dramatic. Annie almost smiled. Richard would agree. Richard has no moral authority on knees. The rest of the shift passed in pieces. Work helped. Patience helped. Clear tasks helped. Annie took vitals, assisted transfers, updated charts, brought warm blankets, and answered questions from people who were more afraid of needing help than they were of pain. Near 5, Dr. Whitaker asked Annie to come to a smaller conference room on the rehab floor. Dr. Moore came with her. Victoria Hale was there already, seated with a notebook open. Marcus stood near the door, and Richard sat at the far side of the table with his cane beside him and a brace visible under his pant leg. Annie stopped. I thought this was with Dr. Whitaker. It is, Richard said. I am behaving as an observer. Victoria looked at him. That remains under review. Dr. Whitaker entered carrying a folder. He looked older than he had that morning, as if the day had asked him to see things he should have seen sooner. Miss Carter, he said, thank you for coming. Annie sat beside Dr. Moore. Dr. Whitaker opened the folder. The formal review will take time. However, some preliminary issues require immediate correction. Annie did not move. First, your interim evaluation will be marked under review and removed from placement consideration until the process is complete. Second, your clinical training application is no longer paused. Third, effective Monday, you will begin a provisional official placement under Dr. Moore's supervision. Annie heard the words, but they seemed to arrive one at a time. Provisional official placement under Dr. Moore. Effective Monday. She looked at Dr. Moore. The older doctor gave a small nod. Annie turned back to Dr. Whitaker. Sir, does that mean I'm accepted? Provisionally, he said, pending final review. But yes, you will be treated as an official placement candidate with stipend eligibility. Annie's throat tightened. Thank you. Dr. Whitaker closed the folder. Do not thank me too quickly. This should have been reviewed earlier. Richard gave a quiet, Dr. Whitaker looked at him. I heard that. I intended you to. Victoria touched the bridge of her nose, but Annie saw the corner of her mouth move. Dr. Whitaker turned back to Annie. There is another matter. The video has circulated internally and partially online. We are working to limit patient privacy exposure. Though you and Mr. Hale were outside hospital treatment areas, still, people may approach you. If anyone pressures you for comments, refer them to communications. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. Victoria spoke next. The Foundation will not issue any public statement without your approval. I appreciate that. Richard leaned forward slightly. Miss Carter, may I say something? Annie looked at him. Yes, sir. I have spent years giving money to institutions and trusting them to know where it should go. Yesterday taught me that money can build a hallway and still fail to notice who is walking it. Dr. Whitaker's face tightened, but he did not interrupt. Richard continued. This grant is not enough. The Foundation will fund a broader scholarship track for clinical trainees from working-class communities, with patient care documentation included in selection. Victoria will lead the structure. Dr. Moore has agreed to advise. Annie turned to Dr. Moore, surprised. Dr. Moore said, I agreed after negotiating coffee standards. Richard sighed. She is impossible. She is right, Annie said. Richard pointed at her. That alliance is forming too quickly. For the first time that day, Annie laughed softly. It did not last long, but it was real. Victoria looked at Annie. We would like your input too. Not as a symbol. As someone who understands what applicants need and what can go wrong when one supervisor has too much control. Annie sat back. You want me to help design it? Yes, Victoria said. With boundaries, paid time, no public speaking unless you choose it. Annie looked at Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore said, You do not need to answer today, Richard added. She will tell you that often. It is good advice, Dr. Moore said. Annie touched the edge of the table. The same hospital that had made her feel temporary was now asking her to help build something that might outlast her. It was too much to hold all at once. I'll think about it, she said. Victoria nodded. Fair. The meeting ended shortly after. Dr. Whitaker left first. Victoria took a call near the window. Marcus helped Richard stand, though Richard pretended not to need as much help as he did. Annie stepped toward the door, then heard Richard say her name. Annie. She turned. This was the first time he had used only her first name without testing it first. Yes, sir. I was difficult at the crosswalk. Yes, sir. Marcus looked away fast. Richard frowned. You were not supposed to agree that quickly. You asked. I did. He adjusted his grip on the cane. Thank you for staying after I gave you every reason not to. Annie thought of the woman in the tan coat, the red signal, the cold sidewalk, and his voice telling her to go. You were hurting, she said. That does not always make a man kind. No, Annie said, but it means he still deserves help. Richard looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Annie left the room and walked down the hallway toward the staff elevators. Her phone buzzed before she reached them. Grace. Well? Annie stopped near the window overlooking the courtyard. She typed slowly. Mama. I got provisional placement. The reply came in pieces. Thank God. Then another. Did you eat? Annie smiled, leaned her forehead briefly near the cool glass without pressing into it, and looked down at the courtyard where two patients were walking with therapists. Each step careful. Each step counted. She typed back, Not yet. Grace answered, Then Justice can wait 5 minutes. Go eat. Annie put the phone away and went to the cafeteria. For once, she bought the hot meal, not crackers, not vending machine soup, a real plate with baked chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes. She sat by the window and took the first bite slowly. It tasted like food. It also tasted, just a little, like being allowed to stay. Monday morning came with a different badge, not a new one. Not yet. The plastic card still had the same scratched edge and the same word printed under Annie Carter's name. Intern. But beneath it, Doctor. Moore had clipped a temporary placement tag signed by administration, and that small white tag changed the way people read the rest. Annie noticed it at the staff entrance. Mr. Alvarez, the security guard, looked at the tag, then at her. Well now, Annie smiled. It's provisional. That still counts as forward. Yes, sir. He tapped the desk once with his pen. Forward is how people get through winter. Annie carried that with her to the rehab floor. Dr. Moore was already there, reviewing the board beside the nurse's station. She had a fresh coffee in one hand and a stack of patient notes in the other. Annie suspected the coffee had come from the Hale office because Dr. Moore did not make a face after sipping it. Good morning, Annie said. Dr. Moore looked at the placement tag. There it is. It feels temporary. Most beginnings do. What do we do first? Dr. Moore handed her a clipboard. Work. That answer steadied Annie more than congratulations would have. Work, she understood. The morning filled quickly. Mrs. Keller complained through 2 assisted walks, then asked when Annie would come back. Mr. Howard took 8 steps with the walker and announced that 9 would be showing off. A man recovering from a hip replacement refused breakfast until Annie warmed the oatmeal and found brown sugar from the cafeteria. Small things. Real things. The kind of care that never made donor reports but changed the temperature of a patient's day. By late morning, Dr. Moore called Annie into a small staff office near rehab. Victoria Hale was already there with a laptop open, papers arranged in neat stacks. Marcus stood outside the glass panel, speaking quietly into his phone. Richard was not present. Annie looked around. Mr. Hale isn't coming? Victoria shook her head. He wanted to. His doctor disagreed. Good. Victoria smiled. That was my answer too. Dr. Moore shut the door and sat. We have 30 minutes before rounds. Let's use them. Victoria turned the laptop so Annie could see the heading on the screen. Hale Foundation Compassionate Clinical Training Scholarship. Annie read the words twice. That's the official name? Draft name, Victoria said. My father wanted to call it the Annie Carter Compassion Scholarship. Annie's face changed at once. No. I told him you would say that. Please don't put my name on it. We won't unless you choose that. I prefer a broader name anyway. Less pressure on you, more useful for future applicants. Annie let out a breath. Thank you. Victoria clicked to the next page. We need your input on selection criteria. Dr. Moore has already made several notes. Dr. Moore said, several polite corrections. Victoria gave her a dry look. She crossed out an entire paragraph and wrote, this sounds like it was made by people who have never missed a meal. Annie glanced at Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore lifted her coffee. It did. Victoria accepted that without argument. So we start again. Annie sat slowly. What do you need from me? Tell us what would have helped you 6 months ago. That question was harder than it sounded. Annie looked at the blank space beneath the criteria list. Money, obviously. But not only money. What else? Victoria asked. A supervisor who couldn't erase everything with one bad evaluation. A way for patient comments to count. A place to report unfair treatment without making yourself a target. Transportation help. Meals during long shifts. Maybe supplies too. Good shoes cost more than people think. Dr. Moore nodded. Shoes matter. Back pain starts at the floor. Victoria typed as Annie spoke. Annie continued, more carefully now. And don't just pick people who already know how to sound polished. Some of us are still learning how to speak in rooms where we've mostly been corrected. Victoria stopped typing for a second, then wrote that down too. Dr. Moore looked at Annie. Good. Annie felt heat in her cheeks. I don't know if that's criteria. It is if we build it right, Victoria said. A knock came at the door before she could continue. Marcus opened it halfway. Miss Hale, Mr. Grayson is here from the board. Victoria's jaw tightened. I did not ask him to come. He said he was invited by Dr. Whitaker's office. Dr. Moore muttered. Of course he did. Annie looked between them. Who is Mr. Grayson? Victoria closed the laptop halfway. Thomas Grayson. Hospital board member. He prefers cost control over human complexity. That's a polite way to say it? That is the version I can say in a hospital. The door opened wider, and Thomas Grayson stepped in without waiting to be welcomed. He was the silver-haired board member Annie remembered from the first meeting, the one with the red tie and smooth voice. Today the tie was blue, but the face was the same, practiced, pleasant, and uninterested in being challenged. Victoria, he said. Dr. Moore, Miss Carter. Annie stood because he was older and because Grace had raised her that way. Good morning, sir. He smiled at that, as if manners confirmed something for him. I won't take long. I heard there was a discussion about expanding foundation support for interns. Wonderful impulse. Truly. But I hope we're being cautious. Victoria did not invite him to sit. Cautious how? Public stories create emotional momentum. Emotional momentum can become expensive policy. Dr. Moore leaned back. A sentence only a boardroom could love. Grayson's smile thinned. I respect compassion, doctor, but hospitals cannot be run on reaction. One touching incident at a crosswalk should not become the basis for rewriting training standards. Annie felt the room shift toward her, though no one said her name. Victoria's voice stayed controlled. The scholarship is not based on one incident. It is based on documented gaps in how we support and evaluate trainees. Gaps are best handled internally, Dr. Moore said. They were internal. That was part of the problem. Grayson turned to Annie with a gentler expression that did not feel gentle. Miss Carter, I'm sure you mean well. And I understand why all this attention must feel exciting. But it would be unfortunate if expectations grew beyond what is realistic. Annie heard Linda's voice inside his words. Different person, same small box. She kept her hands at her sides. What expectations do you mean, sir? Well, an official placement, stipend support, scholarship consultation, these are serious matters. You are still early in your training. Yes, sir. And you understand that being kind to Mr. Hale does not automatically qualify you to advise a foundation. Annie felt Dr. Moore shift beside her, but she answered before anyone could step in. No, sir. Being kind doesn't automatically qualify me. Grayson nodded, satisfied too soon. Annie continued, but needing the kind of support this scholarship is trying to offer does qualify me to say what would help. Working under the evaluation system being reviewed qualifies me to say where it failed me. And helping Mr. Hale was not the reason I was invited here. It was the reason people finally checked what was already happening. Victoria looked at her, still and focused. Grayson's smile faded. That is one perspective. It's mine, Annie said. You asked me. Dr. Moore's mouth twitched, but she said nothing. Grayson turned back to Victoria. I would advise delaying any announcement until the internal review is complete. If the review finds no pattern of bias, a scholarship built around that assumption may look premature. Victoria folded her hands. Oh, and dear Mike, the closed laptop. The scholarship is not waiting for the hospital to admit what the foundation already sees. That sounds adversarial. It sounds overdue. Grayson's tone cooled. Be careful, Victoria. Donor pressure can create legal exposure. Marcus stepped closer to the doorway, quiet but present. Victoria stood. Thank you for your concern, Thomas. We will document everything. Grayson looked at Dr. Moore. And you support this? I support anything that makes it harder for one supervisor's blind spot to become a young person's ceiling. He had no clean reply to that. At the door, he paused and looked at Annie again. Miss Carter, I hope you understand visibility has a cost. Annie remembered Linda's warning. Do not mistake visibility for protection. She met his eyes. So does being invisible. Grayson left. The door closed behind him, and the office seemed to breathe again. Victoria looked at Annie for a long moment. I'm sorry. Annie sat back down. For him? For the way people like him make caution sound like wisdom. Dr. Moore opened the laptop fully again. He did us a favor. Victoria looked at her. How? He showed us exactly what language to protect against. Annie nodded slowly. Add something about applicants not having to perform gratitude. Victoria began typing. Say more. Some programs help you, then expect you to smile on command. Speak at events. Tell your pain in a way that makes donors comfortable. Make everything sound inspiring, even when it was unfair. Victoria typed faster. Dr. Moore said, add consent for storytelling, separate from financial support. Already added, Victoria said, but we can make it stronger. Annie thought of Grayson's smooth warning. And add that lived experience counts as advisory knowledge. Victoria stopped typing and looked up. That wording is good. My mother says I speak better when I'm irritated. I would like to meet your mother, Dr. Moore said. She would ask if all of you ate breakfast. Victoria smiled. A fair question. The meeting continued until Dr. Moore had to leave for rounds. By then, the scholarship draft had changed. It had transportation stipends, meal support for long clinical days, multiple evaluation sources, patient care documentation, anti-retaliation language, privacy protections, and a trainee advisory group that included paid participation. As they left the office, Victoria walked beside Annie. You did well with Grayson. Annie shook her head. I don't like talking to men who sound polite while closing doors. Neither do I. You looked used to it. I am. That's not the same as liking it. They stopped near the corridor leading back to rehab. Victoria lowered her voice. My father built the foundation after my mother died. She was a nurse. He trusts nurses more than executives, which is why executives often frustrate him. Annie glanced toward the black and white photo she had seen in Richard's office. The woman in the picture? Yes, Caroline Hale. She used to say hospitals reveal a country's conscience. That sounds like something my mother would remember. Maybe they would have liked each other. Maybe. Victoria looked down the hall, then back at Annie. You reminded him of her yesterday. Not because of who you are exactly. Because you stopped. Annie did not know what to say to that. Victoria saved her from needing to. Go to rounds. Dr. Moore will pretend she wasn't waiting. She probably was. She absolutely was. Annie returned to the rehab unit and found Dr. Moore beside Mr. Howard's door. You took your time, Dr. Moore said. Grayson came by. Then I admire your restraint. I wanted to say more. You said enough if he left uncomfortable. He did. Then you said enough. They entered Mr. Howard's room. He was sitting in his chair, Cubs cap low on his forehead, arms crossed. I heard there's a scholarship now, he said. Annie stopped. How do you hear everything? I'm old, not absent. Dr. Moore checked his chart. Mr. Howard has sources. My wife, he said. She says if that rich man has money to put names on walls, he's got money to help young folks buy decent shoes. Annie laughed before she could stop herself. Mr. Howard pointed at her shoes. Those yours, Squeak? A little. Get better ones. Feet matter. Dr. Moore looked at Annie. See? Clinical consensus. Annie helped him stand, and this time he used the walker with less argument. Not none, less. After rounds, Annie spent the afternoon collecting notes, updating charts, and trying to stay focused. But Grayson's words followed her. Visibility has a cost. So does being invisible. She had said that as if she fully believed it. Maybe she did. Maybe belief sometimes arrived after the words. Near the end of the shift, Marcus appeared at the nurse's station. "Miss Carter," he said, "Chairman Hale asked me to deliver this." Annie took the sealed envelope. "Should I be nervous?" "Not this time. That's not comforting from you." He almost smiled. "Fair." Inside was a photocopy of an old photograph. Richard, much younger, standing beside Caroline Hale in her nurse's uniform. On the back, written in careful handwriting, was a note. Caroline stopped for people before the world approved of stopping. "Yesterday, you reminded me that the Foundation has been remembering her name, but not always her courage. Thank you for correcting that." Annie read it twice. Dr. Moore came beside her. "Good note?" Annie handed it over. Dr. Moore read it and grew quiet. "Yes," she said. "Good note." Annie slipped the photo carefully into her bag. That evening, as she walked home, her feet still hurt. Her coat was still thin. The city was still cold. But the day had placed something new inside her. Something sturdier than praise. She was no longer just being helped. She was helping shape the help. And for Annie Carter, that made all the difference. The photograph stayed in Annie's bag for 3 days. She did not show it to many people. Not because she was hiding it, but because some things lost weight when passed around too quickly. She showed it to Grace over a video call, holding it close to the phone so her mother could see Caroline Hale's nurse uniform and Richard's younger face beside her. Grace grew quiet. "That woman had kind eyes," she said. "You can tell from a photo?" "I can tell enough." Richard said I reminded him of her. Grace smiled a little. "That scared you, didn't it?" "Yes, ma'am. Because being compared to someone loved is a heavy thing." Annie looked down at the photo. "I don't want to become part of his grief." "Then don't. Become part of the work." That was what Annie tried to do. The scholarship draft moved faster than anything else Annie had ever seen inside a hospital. Victoria sent revised language. Dr. Moore added notes in the margins. Annie crossed out words that made hardship sound noble and replaced them with words that made support sound practical. Transportation, meals, shoes, books, privacy, multiple evaluations, protection from retaliation. The more Annie worked on it, the more she understood what Richard had meant. Money could open a door, but if the hallway behind it was built wrong, people would still get pushed out. By Thursday afternoon, the first serious meeting for the scholarship track was scheduled in a medium conference room near administration, not the boardroom this time. Victoria said that was on purpose. "Big rooms make people perform," she told Annie. "We need people to speak." When Annie arrived, she found Victoria at the front with a laptop, Dr. Moore seated with a legal pad, Dr. Whitaker near the end of the table, Marcus by the wall, and 2 members from hospital education. Richard sat beside the window with his cane resting against the chair. His knee brace was still visible, and Annie was pleased to see he had not tried to hide it. Thomas Grayson was there too. Annie had expected that. She had also hoped not to see him. Both things could be true. Grayson greeted her with the same careful smile. "Miss Carter, good afternoon, sir. Still involved, I see." "Yes, sir." Richard's voice came from the window. She was invited. Grayson turned slightly. "I did not suggest otherwise." "No." "You arranged the words around it." Victoria looked down at her notes, but Annie saw her mouth tighten against a smile. Dr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Let's begin." Victoria stood. "The purpose of today's meeting is to review the proposed Hale Foundation Compassionate Clinical Training Scholarship. This program is designed to support clinical trainees from working class and underrepresented backgrounds through financial assistance, structured supervision, and fairer evaluation channels." Grayson lifted a hand. "Before we discuss expansion, I'd like clarity. Is this scholarship a foundation program or a hospital corrective action?" Victoria answered evenly. Foundation program. Then the hospital should avoid language implying internal failure before the review concludes. Dr. Moore said, the program can acknowledge reality without naming liability. Grayson smiled. That sounds like lawyer language, doctor. No, Dr. Moore said. It sounds like experience. Victoria clicked to the first slide. Annie saw her own suggestions written there. No name attached. That mattered. Need-based transportation support. Meal allowance during extended clinical days. Required faculty review beyond immediate supervisor. Patient care documentation. Protected reporting process. One of the education coordinators, Ms. Patel, leaned forward. Patient care documentation is interesting. We don't usually use patient comments in intern selection. Why not? Richard asked. Ms. Patel glanced at him. They can be subjective, Dr. Moore said. So can supervisor comments. Annie kept her hands still under the table. Victoria looked toward her. Miss Carter, can you speak to that? Annie felt Grayson's attention settle on her. She had learned by now that some people listened in order to understand, and some listened in order to find a loose thread. She chose her words carefully. A patient comment shouldn't be the whole decision, but it should be part of the picture. Sometimes the person closest to the care sees what the form misses. A patient knows if you explain something twice without making them feel slow. They know if you rushed them. They know if you touched the bed rail before moving it so the sound wouldn't scare them. Miss Patel nodded slowly. Those are hard things to measure. Yes, ma'am, Annie said, but they're easy things to feel. Dr. Moore wrote that down. Grayson rested one hand on the table. That is heartfelt, Miss Carter. But feelings do not create consistent standards. Annie turned to him. Neither does ignoring them. The room shifted slightly. Richard looked at his cane. Victoria kept her face neutral. Grayson's smile cooled. You are becoming quite comfortable in meetings. Annie felt the sting beneath the politeness, but she did not take the bait. I'm trying to answer what I'm asked. Victoria moved the slide forward. The program will not rely on feelings alone. It will combine supervisor reports, faculty notes, patient care examples, attendance, skills, growth, and trainee interviews. Dr. Whitaker nodded. That is defensible. Grayson looked at him. Defensible is not the same as wise. Richard spoke before anyone else could. Thomas, when my wife was a nurse, she used to say the chart tells you what happened to the body. The patient tells you what happened to the person. A hospital that trusts only one is half blind. Grayson looked toward the old photo on the slide. Victoria had placed Caroline Hale's image there, not as decoration, but as origin. I respect Mrs. Hale's legacy, Grayson said. Richard's expression did not change. Then do not use respect as a way to bury what she stood for. The room tightened. Victoria stepped in before the exchange could harden. Let's move to anti-retaliation language. That section took the longest. Dr. Moore insisted that trainees must be allowed to report biased scheduling, unequal assignments, public belittling, and evaluation concerns without being sent back under the same supervisor. Patel worried about false reports. Dr. Moore agreed false reports mattered, then asked why fear of false reports so often mattered more than the pattern of quiet harm already present. Annie listened. She spoke only when asked. But with each question, she felt less like a guest and more like someone whose experience had weight. Near the end, Grayson leaned back in his chair. My concern remains unchanged. We are building a large mechanism around one intern's story. Annie felt her pulse quicken. Dr. Moore turned to him. No, we are building a mechanism because one intern's story made it harder to ignore many others. Victoria opened a folder. We have received 11 written statements from current and former trainees since the review notice went out. Patterns include unequal task assignment, lack of documentation for positive performance, and fear of reporting supervisor conduct. Dr. Whitaker looked at the folder, his face grave. 11? 12 as of this morning, Victoria said. One came in through the foundation office. Grayson frowned. Why was the foundation receiving hospital complaints? Victoria met his eyes. Because some trainees did not trust the hospital to receive them. That landed heavily. Annie thought of Paige in the supply room. Of the way she had said she saw and said nothing. Of all the people who had probably seen little pieces of unfairness and carried them away because speaking felt too costly. Richard's voice grew quieter. Thomas, you keep calling this one story. That is because you only looked when a billionaire was involved. Annie was not the first person overlooked. She was the first one you were forced to see. Grayson's face tightened, but he did not answer. Dr. Whitaker closed the folder slowly. The scholarship will move forward. The hospital will cooperate with the Foundation on trainee support, pending legal review. Separately, the internal evaluation review will expand. Linda Barrett's name was not spoken, but everyone heard it anyway. After the meeting, people gathered their papers with the careful relief of those who had avoided open disaster while agreeing to more work. Marcus spoke with Richard near the window. Dr. Moore pulled Miss Patel aside. Grayson left without saying goodbye to Annie. Victoria came to Annie with a folder. You did well. I didn't say much. You said enough at the right time. That seems to be the trick around here. It is. Annie looked toward the door Grayson had used. He doesn't think I should be here. Victoria followed her gaze. He thinks many people shouldn't be in many rooms. He just calls it caution. Does he get to stop this? No, Victoria said, but he can slow it down if we get careless. Then we don't. Victoria studied her. You said that like you're part of the team. Annie realized she had. I guess I did. Good. A few minutes later, Annie walked back toward the rehab unit with Dr. Moore. The older doctor said nothing until they reached the elevator. Then she asked, how did it feel? Like being tested. You were. By them? By yourself? Annie thought about that as the elevator descended. She had entered that room afraid of being used as a symbol. She left still afraid, but with a clearer line in her mind. She would not let them make her into a poster, but she could help build a policy. She would not perform gratitude, but she could practice it by making the next person's road less narrow. When they reached the 4th floor, Mr. Howard called from his room before Annie even stepped inside. Miss Annie, they say you're important now. Annie paused at the doorway. Who said that? People talk. They talk too much. That they do. He pointed at the walker. You still making me use this thing? Yes, sir. Then you're not that important. Dr. Moore laughed under her breath. Annie smiled and came into the room. Important people use walkers too. I'll believe that when I see Richard Hale pushing one. I'll suggest it. You do that. As Annie helped him stand, Mr. Howard's joking faded into concentration. His knees shook. His hands tightened on the walker. Annie lowered her voice. Take your time. The chair isn't going anywhere. He breathed through the step. Feels like it is. I know. You don't know everything. No, sir. Just enough to stand here. He looked at her, then took another step. After shift, Annie found an envelope taped to her locker. Her name was written in Paige's handwriting. Inside was a folded note. I gave my statement today. I told the truth about the discharge papers and the extra assignments. I should have said it sooner. I'm sorry. Annie read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her bag beside Caroline Hale's photograph. Some apologies could not undo harm, but they could become a first payment toward honesty. That evening, Annie did take the bus home. She was tired enough to spend the fare and wise enough not to call that weakness. She sat by the window, watching the city pass in blocks of light and cold pavement. Her phone buzzed. Grace, did you eat? Annie smiled. Not yet. Grace replied. One day I'm going to get a different answer. Annie typed, I helped build part of a scholarship today. For a long moment, there was no reply. Then Grace wrote, that counts as food for the soul. Now get something for the body. Annie laughed softly, and the woman across the aisle looked over, then smiled without asking why. At her stop, Annie stepped off into the cold. Her feet still hurt. Her future was still uncertain. Linda's review was not finished. Grayson had not gone away, but Annie carried something new with her now. Not protection, not comfort, purpose. And purpose, Annie was learning, could make a tired walk feel a little less lonely. The internal review finished on a Friday morning. Annie heard about it first from the way the rehab floor changed before anyone said a word. Linda Barrett did not appear at the nurse's station for morning assignments. Her name had been removed from the supervisor rotation board. 2 administrators Annie did not know walked past with folders held close and faces too controlled to be casual. Paige came in late, eyes red, and went straight to Dr. Moore's office. Annie kept working because patients still needed help standing, eating, walking, and understanding discharge instructions. Hospitals did not pause for justice. They only made room for it if someone forced the door open. At 10:30, Dr. Moore found Annie in room 418, where Mr. Howard was arguing with his walker again. "I'm telling you, this thing turns crooked on purpose," he said. Annie adjusted the rear legs. "It turns crooked because you keep trying to steer it like a shopping cart. Shopping carts listen better. Then we'll file a complaint with the Walker Company." Dr. Moore knocked lightly on the open door. "Annie, when you're finished, Dr. Whitaker would like to see us." Mr. Howard looked between them. "That sounds official." "It is," Dr. Moore said. He turned to Annie. "You in trouble?" "Not that I know of. That's how trouble starts." Annie smiled. "You sound experienced. I was married 46 years. I know tones." Dr. Moore said, "Your wife must be a patient woman." "Patient? No. Loyal. Different thing." The words stayed with Annie as she finished his notes. Loyal. Different thing. She had been thinking about that all week. Loyalty was not pretending harm had not happened. Loyalty was telling the truth before the place you loved rotted from silence. When Annie stepped into Dr. Whitaker's office with Dr. Moore, she found Victoria Hale seated near the window, a legal folder in front of her. Richard was not there. Marcus stood outside the door, speaking quietly with someone from administration. Dr. Whitaker looked tired, but not uncertain. "Miss Carter," he said. "Dr. Moore, thank you." Annie sat. Dr. Whitaker folded his hands on the desk. "The preliminary review of intern evaluations and supervisory practices has produced enough concern for immediate action." Annie's throat tightened, but she did not interrupt. "Nurse Barrett has been removed from intern supervision pending final administrative review. She has also been placed on leave from scheduling authority." Dr. Moore gave no visible reaction. Annie looked down at her hands. She expected relief. Instead, she felt the strange heaviness that comes when a thing you endured finally receives a name. Dr. Whitaker continued. "The review found inconsistent documentation across trainees, repeated assignment imbalance, and several cases where positive performance notes were omitted from official evaluations. The pattern disproportionately affected interns from lower income backgrounds and interns of color." There it was, said in careful language, still real. Victoria spoke next. "The Foundation will support an external consultant to help redesign the evaluation process, but the hospital has agreed the final authority must include more than one supervisor. No intern's future should rest on one person's private opinion." Annie thought of Linda's office, the mug that said, "Excellence is a habit," the folded paper in her pocket that day. "What happens to the people she already evaluated?" Annie asked. Dr. Whitaker nodded as if he had expected the question. "Files from the last 2 cycles will be reviewed. Former interns will be contacted where appropriate. Some decisions may not be reversible, but records can be corrected and opportunities reopened." "May not be reversible," Annie repeated softly. "I know," he said. "That is not enough." "No, sir, it isn't." Victoria's eyes moved to Annie. "That sentence will be in the Foundation's report. Not enough." Dr. Moore turned to Dr. Whitaker. "And Annie's placement?" "Confirmed," he said. "No longer provisional. Effective immediately. Clinical training intern under Dr. Moore's supervision, with stipend eligibility active this pay cycle." For a second, Annie could hear the radiator in her apartment, her mother asking if she had eaten, Richard's cane on wet pavement, Linda's pen marking her down. Mr. Beese, Howard saying loyal and patient were different. "Confirmed," she breathed in. "Thank you," she said, and this time the words did not feel too small. They felt earned. Dr. Whitaker looked at her with something close to apology. "You should not have needed a billionaire's phone call to receive a fair review." "No, sir," Annie said. Victoria looked at him. "That should be in the report too." He nodded. "It will be." Dr. Moore leaned back. "Good. Now we need to discuss how to keep this from becoming a one-week conscience exercise." "That is why we are here," Victoria said. She opened her folder and slid several pages across the desk. "The scholarship track has been approved by the Hale Foundation Board. The hospital partnership is pending final legal language, but funding is secured for the pilot year. 10 trainees. Transportation support, meal support, footwear and supply allowance, faculty mentorship, multiple source evaluation, and protected reporting." Annie blinked. 10? Victoria nodded. "You said it should open for more than you. I didn't think it would happen that fast." "Neither did Thomas Grayson," Victoria said. Dr. Whitaker's mouth moved as if he was trying not to smile. Mr. Grayson has entered several objections into the record. Of course he has, Dr. Moore said. Victoria continued. He argued the program may create expectations the hospital cannot maintain. Annie looked at her. What did you say? I said expectations are often how institutions discover what they should have been doing. Dr. Moore raised her coffee cup slightly. Good answer. Victoria's expression softened. My father said it less politely. I can imagine, Annie said. There was a knock at the door. Marcus opened it. Chairman Hale is asking if he may come in. Victoria closed her eyes. He was told to stay in the car. Marcus nodded. Yes. Dr. Moore said, That has never worked on him, has it? No, doctor. Richard entered with his cane, slower than before but steadier. He wore a dark overcoat and the knee brace beneath his pants. He looked at Annie first. Miss Carter, Mr. Hale, I hear congratulations are in order. Annie smiled faintly. For both of us, you're using the brace. Und protest. But using it, Marcus has become unbearable. Marcus said from the doorway, still accurate. Richard sat carefully in the chair Victoria pushed toward him. He looked at Dr. Whitaker. Has the hospital done the right thing? Dr. Whitaker answered without defensiveness. It has begun. Richard nodded. Beginning is acceptable, if followed by movement. Annie thought of crosswalks, of first steps, of knees that argued and people who still had to move. Victoria handed Richard a copy of the scholarship summary. He did not read it. He placed it on the desk and looked at Annie. My wife used to say a hospital's conscience is not measured by the names on its walls, but by who gets helped when nobody important is watching. Annie looked down. Richard continued. The foundation forgot parts of that. Not all at once. That is how forgetting works. A little efficiency here, a little prestige there, a few forms that make people smaller because smaller people are easier to process. Dr. Whitaker accepted the rebuke quietly. Richard's voice became gentler. You reminded us. Annie shook her head. I helped you cross a street. Yes, he said. And then you helped us see who else was still waiting at the curb. No one spoke for a moment, but this time Annie did not feel trapped by it. She felt the words settling where they needed to settle. Dr. Moore turned to Annie. There's one more thing. Annie looked at her. What? Dr. Moore smiled. Your new badge. Victoria took a small envelope from her folder and handed it across. Annie opened it carefully. Inside was a fresh hospital badge. Her photo was the same, but the line under her name had changed. Annie Carter, clinical training intern. Her fingers tightened around the plastic. Richard said nothing. Victoria said nothing. Dr. Whitaker said nothing. Dr. Moore, who knew when silence was useful and when it was not, said, Well, put it on. Annie laughed under her breath, though her eyes burned. She unclipped the old badge and held it for a second before setting it on the desk. Then she clipped on the new one. It felt light. It meant heavy. When Annie returned to the rehab floor, Mr. Howard was the first to notice. Come here, he called from his chair. Annie walked in. You're supposed to be doing ankle pumps. I'm exercising my eyes. Let me see. She stepped closer. He read the badge slowly. Clinical training intern. Well, look at that. It's official. He nodded, satisfied. Good. Now you can officially stop bossing me. No, sir. Now I can document it better. He laughed, then pointed at the chair beside him. Sit for a second. I have rounds. 30 seconds won't break the hospital. Annie sat. Mr. Howard looked toward the window. When I came back from Vietnam, I had a supervisor at the plant who used to call men like me lucky to have any job. Took me years to understand he wasn't measuring my work. He was measuring what he thought I deserved. Annie listened. People like that don't always shout, he said. Sometimes they just hold the clipboard. Annie looked at her new badge. Yes, sir. You keep that badge clean. Not for them. For you. I will. And get better shoes. She smiled. Everybody keeps saying that. Because everybody is right. At the end of the day, Annie called her mother from the quiet corner near the stairwell. Grace answered with her usual question. Did you eat? Annie laughed. Yes, ma'am. I had lunch. A real lunch? Yes. Good. Now tell me. Annie took the badge from her coat and held it, even though Grace could not see it. It's official, Mama. Clinical training intern. Dr. Moore, supervising. Stipend active. Grace did not speak right away. Mama? I'm here, Grace said, but her voice had changed. I just needed to hear it in my heart before I answered. Annie closed her eyes. Grace whispered, "You stood tall. I was scared." Standing tall while scared still counts. Annie looked through the stairwell window at Chicago darkening outside. Linda's been removed from supervision. Good. It doesn't fix everything. No, Grace said. But justice doesn't always come as a whole meal. Sometimes it comes one honest bite at a time. Annie smiled through the ache in her chest. You and your food wisdom, because you still forget to eat. After the call, Annie stood in the stairwell for another minute. She thought of Linda, Grayson, Paige, Dr. Moore, Victoria, Richard, Marcus, Mr. Howard, Mrs. Keller, and every person who had crossed her path since the cold evening at the intersection. The story had started with a hand offered to a man who said he did not need help. Now that same hand held a badge no one could take lightly. Annie clipped it back onto her coat and returned to the hallway. There was work to do. 3 months later, Annie Carter no longer stopped at the staff entrance expecting someone to tell her she had made a mistake. The new badge had become familiar against her coat. Clinical training intern. The words still mattered every time she clipped it on, but they no longer startled her. She had earned them in hallways, patient rooms, long shifts, careful notes, and in one cold crosswalk where nobody else had slowed down. Street Catherine had changed too, not completely. Hospitals did not become fair because one review was finished or one scholarship was approved. Some people still whispered. Some still watched Annie too closely, waiting for her to stumble. Thomas Grayson still sent polished objections to foundation meetings. Linda Barrett had not returned to intern supervision, and the final review had required corrections to more files than Dr. Whitaker first expected. But change had begun to leave marks. The first group of Hale Foundation Compassionate Clinical Training Scholars had been selected. 10 names. 10 people who needed transportation passes, meal support, good shoes, second chances, fairer evaluations, and someone in authority who could not erase them with one careless paragraph. Annie had helped review the practical needs section. Dr. Moore had argued for mentorship hours. Victoria had made sure no recipient had to tell personal hardship stories for donor approval. Richard had argued about the name again. "You are being unreasonable," he told Annie in the foundation office one afternoon. "No, sir. I'm being consistent. The Annie Carter Compassion Scholarship has dignity. It has pressure. It has recognition. It has my name where 10 other people's needs should be." Victoria looked up from her laptop. "She's right." Richard turned to his daughter. "You are both becoming difficult." Dr. Moore, who had come for the meeting and stayed for the coffee, said, "They were difficult before. You are only noticing now." Marcus stood by the door, expression neutral. "For the record, sir, I noticed earlier." Richard pointed his cane at him. "No one asked you." Annie laughed with them, and the sound did not feel out of place. That was new too. On the day the scholarship officially launched, there was no large press event. Annie had asked for that. The foundation released a plain statement approved by every recipient. No dramatic photos, no video of Annie at the crosswalk, no poor girl saved by billionaire headline, just a program description, eligibility criteria, and a quote from Caroline Hale that Richard insisted on including. "A hospital's conscience is measured by who receives care when no one important is watching." Annie approved that line. Grace did too. "You did good," her mother said on the phone that evening. "We did good," Annie answered. "Don't try to hand me your credit. I learned that from you." "Then you learned well. Did you eat?" "Yes, ma'am." "A real meal? Chicken, rice, green beans." Grace was quiet for half a second. "Look at God," Annie smiled. "Mama, it was cafeteria chicken. Blessings come in many textures." By then, Grace's medication support had started through the general fund, just as promised. No public mention, no donor spotlight. Annie had cried the first time the pharmacy bill dropped to an amount she could pay without choosing between food and rent. Grace had cried too, but she pretended it was allergies. Annie let her pretend. Spring came slowly to Chicago. The wind lost some of its bite, though it still found ways to remind people who owned the lake. Outside Street Catherine, the crosswalk had been repainted. The white stripes looked brighter now, though Annie knew paint had nothing to do with what happened there. People still hurried across with coffee cups and phones. Cars still edged forward too soon. The city still tested everyone's patience. Annie passed that crosswalk every morning. Sometimes she thought of Richard standing there, angry and afraid, gripping his cane like pride could hold up a body. Sometimes she thought of the people who walked around him. She no longer wondered why they had not stopped. That question was too easy to ask and too hard to answer honestly. People were busy. People were tired. People were afraid of getting involved. People told themselves someone else would do it. Annie had learned that justice often began in the small place where someone stopped saying someone else. One Thursday afternoon, after a long shift in rehab, Annie was walking toward the elevators with a stack of discharge packets when she heard a familiar voice from room 418. "Miss Annie." She turned. Mr. Howard sat in his chair by the window, Cub's cap low. Walker parked beside him like an enemy he had learned to tolerate. "You leaving without saying goodbye?" he asked. "I was going to come back." "No, you weren't. You were being efficient." "That sounds like an accusation." "It is." She stepped into the room. "How are the knees? Mine or yours?" "Yours. Still mine. That's the problem." Annie checked the whiteboard. "Discharge tomorrow." His wife would pick him up in the morning. "You ready to go home?" "No." Annie looked at him. He sighed. "Yes, but no. That makes sense." "It does?" "Leaving help can feel harder than needing it." Mr. Howard looked out the window. "You always say things like you've been old before." "No, sir. I just listen to people who have." He nodded at her badge. "You keep going, Miss Annie. I plan to. And don't let them turn you into a speech." She smiled. "I'm trying not to." "Good. Speeches don't help a man get out of bed. Hands do." Annie's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." After work, Annie stopped by the Hale Foundation office to drop off notes from the first scholarship orientation. Richard was there, though he was supposed to have left an hour earlier. His cane rested beside his chair. A prescribed brace supported his knee. He looked better than he had months ago, but he still moved carefully when he stood. "You're late," Annie said. "I own the foundation." "That doesn't answer the charge." Victoria, seated across the room, did not look up from her laptop. He refused to leave until he read every orientation note. Richard frowned. "I was reviewing." "You were hovering," Victoria said. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "The car is ready, sir." Richard ignored him and looked at Annie. "How did orientation go?" "Good. Nervous. A few people asked if there would be cameras." His expression tightened. "There will not." "I told them." "And did they believe you?" "Not all the way. But they will." Victoria closed her laptop. "That takes time." Annie nodded. "Trust usually does." Richard studied her for a moment. "You sound more certain now." "I'm not. I just don't apologize for being uncertain as much. That is progress. It's work. Same thing sometimes." Marcus cleared his throat. "Sir, your appointment." Richard sighed and reached for his cane. This time he did not pretend he did not need it. Annie noticed. So did Victoria. At the door, Richard paused. "Miss Carter." "Yes, sir. I passed the crosswalk this morning." Annie waited. A man was helping his wife across. She moved slowly. He held her hand like the whole street could wait. "That's good." "Yes," Richard said. "It is." He seemed to want to say more, then decided against making the moment larger than it needed to be. Annie appreciated that. After he left, Victoria handed Annie a folder. "Final scholarship packet. Your edits are included." Annie flipped through the pages. No forced testimonials, no use of personal stories without consent. Meal support listed beside tuition, not hidden in a footnote. Shoes included under clinical supplies. She looked up. "You kept the shoes." "After Mr. Howard called my office to explain footwear economics, I didn't dare remove them." Annie laughed. "He called you?" "He did. He said if rich people can put marble in lobbies, they can buy nurses decent shoes. He has a point." He had several. Annie held the folder against her chest. "Thank you." Victoria's face softened. "No, thank you for not letting us make the easy version." That evening, Annie took the bus home. She could afford it now, but she still noticed the price. Some habits did not disappear when money arrived. They softened slowly, like hands warming after cold. Halfway through the ride, an older woman got on carrying a canvas grocery bag and a folded medical form. She moved down the aisle, unsure of where to sit. The bus shifted forward before she found a handhold, and she caught the seat back with a startled breath. Annie stood at once. "Ma'am, you can take my seat." The woman looked tired. "Oh, honey. I'm all right," Annie smiled. "I know. Take it anyway." The woman sat, grateful but trying not to show too much of it. Annie held the pole as the bus moved through evening traffic. Outside, the city slid by in brick walls, corner stores, laundromats, church signs, and apartment windows lit against the dark. At her stop, Annie stepped down onto the sidewalk. The air was cold, but not cruel. She walked the last block home carrying the scholarship packet in her bag and a container of soup from the cafeteria for dinner because Grace had taught her better than crackers. Her phone buzzed as she reached her building. "Grace, did you eat?" Annie smiled and typed, "I have soup." Grace replied, "I'll accept that." Annie climbed the stairs. Before unlocking her door, she paused in the hallway and thought of the first night after meeting Richard. The same steps had felt heavier then. The same key had stuck in the same lock. The same small apartment had waited with the same radiator noises, but Annie was not the same. Not because a billionaire had found her, because she had been seen, and then she had chosen to help others be seen too. The next morning, Annie returned to Street Catherine early. The lobby was busy. The elevators were slow. Someone had spilled coffee near the gift shop. A volunteer was giving directions to radiology. Everything ordinary, everything still worth doing. Near the corridor leading to rehab, an elderly woman in a pale coat stood holding an appointment paper with both hands. People moved around her. She looked from one sign to another, confused but too proud to ask. Annie stopped. For a moment, the hospital noise faded into the memory of wind, wet pavement, and a man gripping a cane at the curb. Then Annie stepped forward. "Good morning, ma'am," she said. "Where are you trying to go?" The woman looked embarrassed. "I'm supposed to find the mobility clinic. I thought I knew the way." "It can be confusing. I hate needing directions." Annie smiled and held out her hand. "Take my hand, ma'am. I'll walk you there." The woman hesitated, then took it. Across the hall, Richard Hale stood near the foundation corridor with Marcus beside him. He had arrived for a meeting, but he did not interrupt. He simply watched as Annie walked slowly with the woman, matching her pace, holding the appointment paper in her other hand, speaking softly enough that only the woman could hear. Marcus looked at Richard. "Sir?" Richard's eyes stayed on the hallway. "Give them a minute." Annie did not see him at first. She was focused on the woman beside her, on the careful steps, on the small act of helping someone arrive with dignity. When they reached the clinic doors, the woman squeezed Annie's hand. "Thank you, dear." "Yes, ma'am." On her way back, Annie finally noticed Richard. He leaned on his cane, older in the morning light than his money ever let people imagine. He nodded once. Annie nodded back. No speech, no cameras, no applause. Only a hallway, a hand offered, and a person helped across the distance they could not manage alone. That was the part Annie understood now. Kindness did not become real because someone rewarded it. Justice did not become strong because someone announced it. The best things often began quietly, in places people almost missed. A crosswalk, a park bench, a hospital room, a bus aisle, a hallway. Annie Carter had not changed because the world finally noticed her. The world had changed around her because she kept noticing others. And when the next person needed a steady hand, Annie did what she had done from the beginning. She stopped, she smiled, and she helped them cross. The lesson of Annie Carter's story is simple but powerful. Real kindness does not wait for recognition, reward, or permission. Annie helped Richard Hale before she knew his name, his wealth, or his influence. She saw pain where others saw inconvenience, and she chose to stop when everyone else kept walking. Her story reminds us that justice often begins with one quiet act of courage, and that the people society overlooks may carry the very compassion the world needs most. Sometimes changing a life starts with something as small as offering your hand. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.